Hi guys. Tonight we're taking a softer path. You've likely heard of Kyoto. Temples, cherry blossoms, geisha drifting under lantern light. But have you ever lived a day in ancient Kyoto? In silence, in sandals, in the shadows of samurai? Tonight isn't about battles. It's about the stillness between them, the rituals, the incense, the whispered thoughts of a city that once ruled the heart of Japan. So before we step into the mist, like the video and subscribe if you want more. And I'd love to know, what time is it, where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. It always amazes me whereabouts people are listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum of background peace. Get comfortable. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Tonight, we travel not just far from where you are, but far from when you are. Close your eyes now. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for a moment. Feel the air fill your lungs. Now release it slowly through your mouth. Again. Breathe in. Breathe out. Listen for the quiet creak of an old wooden floorboard beneath your feet. Can you hear it? The gentle protest of timber that has stood for generations. Let's drift back, not decades, but centuries. The year is 1325. The eastern hills of Kyoto rise before us, cherry trees stretching their branches over tiled rooftops like protective fingers. Just outside the city's heart, nestled between pines and stone walls, stands a humble dwelling, my dwelling, where morning has not yet announced itself with full voice. I wake before the sun. Not out of duty, out of rhythm. My body knows the hour without needing to be told. The tatami beneath my sleeping mat feels cool against my skin. Shoji screens filter the earliest hints of dawn, turning darkness into something softer, something gray and patient. The faint scent of cedar from the walls mingles with lingering charcoal from last night's hearth. The room breathes around me. A gentle breeze finds its way through imperceptible gaps, causing the hanging scroll to stir slightly against the wall. The painting, mountains disappearing into mist, seems to move with ghostly life. Outside, birds call to one another, conversations I've heard every morning yet never truly understand. The timber frame of my home groans softly, expanding as the first warmth of day touches its beams. My feet find the wooden floor, cooler than the tatami. The edge of my cotton robe brushes against my leg as I shift my weight, a whisper of fabric against skin. Beyond these walls, life begins its careful awakening. The soft crunch of sandals on gravel reaches me, perhaps the fishmonger's son making early deliveries. 2 houses away, wooden shutters clack open, the sound crisp in the morning stillness. Someone coughs once, then falls silent. A thin slice of sunlight slips through the seam of the paper door. Golden, silent, revealing dust particles that dance without purpose or destination. I watch them float, neither rising nor falling with any urgency. There are no clocks here, no alarms, only the light. The wind, my breath. From the road that winds toward the city center comes the distinctive squeak of a vendor's cartwheel turning slowly over stone. A dog barks once, then goes quiet again, perhaps satisfied that it has announced the day adequately. Life continues beyond these walls, but it does not demand my immediate attention. I press my hand gently to the floor. It's smooth, warm where the light has touched it, cool in the shadows. The contrast pleases me. You are safe here. You are needed by no one right now. You may simply exist. I exhale, a sound barely louder than the wind through pine needles. The air leaves my lungs in a measured stream, as if my body remembers its duty to breathe even before my mind fully wakes. This sigh belongs to the house as much as to me. Another note in the quiet symphony of morning. My bedding rustles as I fold back the thin covering. The tatami yields beneath my knees with a soft crinkle of woven straw, compressing, then slowly rising again as I shift my weight. I move with the deliberate pace of water finding its path downhill, unhurried, but certain. Each movement flows into the next, a sequence performed 10,000 mornings before this one. The half-light catches my profile as I turn. My hair, still dark but threaded with silver at the temples, remains tied back even in sleep, a habit from decades of service. The skin near my eyes carries fine creases, not from battlefields or hardship, but from watching, from considering, from the weight of thoughts carried across 47 seasons. My shoulders remain straight but not rigid, bearing duty without strain. Before standing, I place both palms flat against the floor. The cool tatami grounds me, connects me to the earth beneath this house. I feel the subtle vibration of the world turning, or perhaps only imagine it. There's no need to rush into the day. The morning waits, patient as a stone. The room holds its breath around me. No mechanical intrusions mark the passage of time. No ticking, no chiming, no metal against metal. Only the house itself speaks, its wooden joints expanding with warmth, contracting with cool. Somewhere beyond the eastern wall, a bush warbler calls once, then falls silent. I turn toward the light that seeps through the rice paper screen. My hand lifts to the wooden frame, fingers hovering a moment before touching it. This pause isn't hesitation, it's acknowledgement. Another day granted, another beginning offered. The shoji slides open with a sound, like a whisper, wood against wood, a conversation between old friends. Light pours through the widening gap, spilling across the threshold like water finding level ground. The glow is pale gold, the color of early promises. I watch as this light crawls across the floor, claiming territory inch by inch. It reveals the texture of the tatami, the subtle variations in the weave. Dust motes hang suspended in the beam, tiny worlds adrift in golden space, neither rising nor falling, simply being. I bow my head slightly to the light. Not the formal bow I will offer later to my lord, but something more intimate, a private gesture between myself and the day, respect for what comes, whatever it may bring. A crow calls once from a distant tree, its voice cutting through the stillness. The sound carries no message I can decipher, yet reminds me that beyond these walls, the world proceeds on its own terms, by its own rhythms. You rise with me now, slowly, without effort, as if drawn upward by the sun itself. Your presence, though unseen, joins mine in this moment of transition. The floor beneath your feet feels smooth and cool, polished by countless passages. These boards have carried generations, have witnessed 10,000 mornings just like this one. They support you now, grounding you in this place, this time. As the light stretches further into the room, my shadow extends across the floor, crossing where yours would be if shadows could see shadows. For a breath, our movements align, as though we've shared this ritual before, as though you've always been here, watching the day begin through my eyes. Through the open screen, a stone path winds between patches of moss, each blade tipped with dew that catches light like scattered jewels. The pine in the courtyard sways almost imperceptibly, its movement visible only in how the shadows shift beneath it. No words pass between us. None are needed. The day begins not with declarations or demands, but with presence, with the simple act of being here, now, as the world turns once more toward light. I cross the room toward a narrow doorway, no more than a suggestion of space between two wooden frames. The side alcove waits, unadorned and purposeful. I slide open this smaller door with a gesture that takes no more thought than blinking. The wood glides along its track with barely a sound, revealing a space meant not for visitors, but for the private rituals that anchor a life. The alcove greets me with simplicity. No scrolls hang here, no decorative touches soften its purpose. A single beam of morning light cuts diagonally across the space, falling precisely on a stone basin that rests against the far wall. The light catches the water's surface, turning it momentarily to gold. The rest of the alcove remains in half shadow, as if the room itself is still waking. The water in the basin lies perfectly still. Not a ripple disturbs its surface, a mirror of dark glass reflecting the ceiling beams above. A bamboo ladle rests on its stone cradle beside the basin, its handle worn smooth by years of the same hand, my hand, gripping it in the same place. Around the base of the basin, a thin collar of moss has formed, vivid green against grey stone. I have never removed it. Some things should be allowed to grow where they will. I lift the ladle, my fingers finding their familiar place. The bamboo feels warm despite the morning chill. Water glugs softly as it fills the hollow, a gentle sound that seems to belong to a time before words. I raise it level with my face, then tilt it slowly. The water pours over my skin in a continuous stream, cool but not shocking. I make no sound, no sudden intake of breath. This is not a test to be endured, but a greeting to be savored. The water follows the contours of my face, gathering along my jaw before falling. Each drop strikes the stone below with a crystalline note, different from the one before it. These sounds collect in the quiet room, a brief music that exists for no one's pleasure but my own. I stand motionless, letting the water find its way, letting the sound complete itself. My hand reaches for the linen cloth folded beside the basin. The fabric is thin but sturdy, woven by hands I never knew but whose work I honor each morning. I pat my face once, firmly but without haste, then refold the cloth along its original creases. The ritual requires no more than this. One pass to dry, one motion to restore order. I turn toward the low table where my sword rests. The morning light has advanced just enough to touch the edge of its lacquered scabbard, highlighting the subtle grain of the wood beneath the finish. The metal fittings remain in shadow. Patient. Both hands reach for the sword. Never one, never casually. I lift it with the reverence due not to a weapon but to a tradition, to the lineage it represents. I hold it level with my chest, its weight familiar, yet never taken for granted. From beneath the table, I retrieve a silk cloth. My fingers move along the hilt, wiping away dust that isn't there. The cloth slides over the tsuka, the wrapped handle that knows the shape of my grip better than any living person. This isn't maintenance. It's acknowledgement, a conversation without words. My eyes close. 3 breaths pass, measured and even. The world beyond this room continues. Birds call, distant footsteps pass, the house settles, but here, in this moment, there is only alignment. Not emptiness, but clarity, the space between thoughts where intention formed. Even still water, I speak softly, the words barely disturbing the air, mirrors the blade's silent weight only when unstirred. The words hang in the air briefly, then dissolve. A haiku I composed years ago, when I first understood that stillness is not the absence of movement, but its foundation. I returned the sword to its place on the table, setting it down with the same care I would use to place a sleeping child in its bed. The cloth goes beneath it, a small cushion between steel and wood. My gaze shifts to the armor stand against the wall. My domaru waits there, shoulder guards and breastplate arranged in the semblance of a body. It has been 26 days since I last wore it. The house has grown accustomed to its stillness. I step forward and adjust the stand, turning it perhaps 2 finger widths eastward. The armor now faces the rising sun directly, not superstition, symbol. The day begins in the east. We face what comes with readiness, not fear. Stepping back, I observe the whole. The armor stands straight, dignified in its emptiness. Light catches the silk cords that bind the plates together, the only touch of color against the darkened leather. What I see is not merely equipment, but the physical form of an idea passed through generations. I exhale once, deeply. The breath carries no sound but fills the small room with completion. The morning ritual is finished. The sword will remain at rest today, but I carry its discipline within me as I step back into the light. I kneel before the armor stand, folding my legs beneath me with practiced ease. The room settles into a deeper quiet, as if acknowledging this unscheduled moment of communion. Outside, a cartwheel creaks. Along the path, a child calls out to another, life continuing its steady flow. But here, within these walls, time bends inward upon itself, collapsing years into moments. The morning light angles through the window, striking the armor's surface. The black lacquer catches the sun but doesn't reflect it, instead absorbing the light, transforming it into a soft, dignified glow. The chest plate bears the marks of years, not as flaws, but as testament. Small areas where the shine has dulled, where the surface has yielded to touch and time. I've never sought to restore these places to their original luster. Some things earn their weariness honestly. My knees creak against the tatami as I lower myself closer to the armor. The sound of aging joints, a private conversation between body and floor. I don't bow as I would before a shrine or superior. My posture remains straight, respectful but familiar. This is not worship but recognition, centered on the breastplate, partially caught in the advancing sunbeam. The mon of my family. A crane in flight, wings extended in an eternal moment between earth and sky. The edges have faded slightly, the wings particularly worn where countless cloths have passed over them in cleaning. Still visible, but carrying the patina of service. My hand rises from my lap, hovering inches from the crest. I hold it there, suspended between intention and action. The space between my fingertips and the lacquer feels charged, as if years of memory have condensed into this narrow gap. I don't rush. Some moments require their full measure. I extend my right index finger and make contact with the surface. The sensation is immediate. Smooth, cool, familiar. I trace the line of the crane's wing with deliberate slowness, following the curve from body to tip. The motion contains no purpose beyond connection. The sound is almost imperceptible, the faint squeak of dry skin against aged lacquer. A sound no one else would notice or remember, yet it anchors me to this moment, to this place, to who I am. My eyes remain fixed on the symbol beneath my finger, not searching, not examining, simply seeing what has always been there. My face betrays nothing, but behind this calm exterior, memory stirs. A flash. Myself, decades younger, kneeling in a different room. The weight of expectation heavy in the air. The mon being stitched onto my sash for the first time. No words spoken, only the understanding that I was no longer merely myself. It is not the armor that holds meaning, but the mark upon it, the story it carries, generation to generation. My finger stops at a hairline crack in the lacquer, barely visible unless you know to look for it. A tiny fracture in the surface, running through the edge of the crane's wing. I've noticed it for years, but have never repaired it. Some imperfections deserve to remain. I press slightly against this mark, not to test the armor's integrity, but my own. Whether this symbol, this identity, still belongs to me, still claims me as I claim it. The pressure is gentle, brief, then withdrawn. I draw a full breath, filling my lungs completely. Not the sharp intake of surprise or pain, but the measured breath of one revisiting something precious and fragile. The air carries the scent of wood and old lacquer, smells that existed before I was born and will continue after I'm gone. There is a moment when words gather behind my lips, a name, perhaps, or some private vow renewed. But they remain unspoken. The silence holds everything necessary. With the same deliberate pace, my hand withdraws, returning to rest in my lap. The moment has been honored. I rise to my feet in a single fluid motion, leaving the crest bathed in morning light, the crane still frozen mid-flight, neither rising nor falling, simply being. I cross the main room to the hearth in the center, where coals breathe under a blanket of ash. No flames danced there, just a soft crimson glow pulsing beneath the gray surface. The warmth radiates outward in gentle waves, touching my hands as I crouch beside it. Not hot enough to cook, but sufficient to maintain what has already been prepared. From the kitchen alcove, I retrieve 2 earthenware bowls. They rest against each other on the shelf, companions for years, though they were never made as a pair. One bears a slight blue tint to its glaze, the other a warmer brown. Both carry the small imperfections of things made by hand. A ridge where a thumb pressed too firmly, a slight wobble at the base, tiny chips along their rims that have softened with time. I place them on the low table with deliberate care, setting each exactly where it belongs. The wooden surface beneath them is dark with age, polished by countless meals and countless hands. I've eaten at this table since before my beard showed its first gray strands. Steam rises from the rice pot as I uncover it. The aroma fills the space, clean, subtle, earthy. I scoop white mounds into each bowl, noting how the grains cling together yet remain distinct. No seasoning mars their purity, no sauce to mask their essential nature. Rice is not merely food, it is foundation. From a ceramic jar, I extract 2 umeboshi, pickled plums, wrinkled and deep red. Their sharp vinegar scent cuts through the mild sweetness of the rice. I place one atop each mound, centered precisely. The red against white creates a stark contrast, like a painter's deliberate brush stroke. I hear the almost imperceptible whisper of bare feet on tatami before I see him. The young man enters the room with his head slightly bowed, his movements careful but not tentative. His robe is plain cotton, tied simply at the waist. He pauses at the edge of the room, then bows, not deeply, but with appropriate respect, before kneeling opposite me at the table. We sit in stillness. Neither of us speaks. There is no need to fill this space with words that would only diminish it. The fire shifts once, a coal settling deeper into ash, with a soft crack that seems to echo in the silence. This quiet between us isn't awkward or strained. It's inherited, learned through observation and repetition. A silence with purpose. Almost in unison, we reach for our chopsticks. The synchronicity isn't planned, merely the result of shared rhythm. The wooden utensils make a gentle clack against the ceramic bowls, the sound sharp and clear in the quiet room. I take my first bite of plain rice. The texture is soft, but retains enough firmness to require proper chewing. The flavor is subtle, clean, slightly sweet. I eat methodically, each motion economical. There's no need for embellishment. The simplicity is precisely the point. With my second bite, I take a small piece of the umeboshi. The flavor strikes hard against my tongue. Intensely salty, sour, sharp. The contrast with the rice is deliberate, a shock to the senses that brings alertness. My expression remains unchanged, but I feel my posture straighten slightly in response. Without looking directly at him, I notice the young man watching my movements from the corner of his eye. He follows my example, hesitant at first as he samples the plum, then more assured as he continues. His chopsticks move with growing confidence. Neither of us looks directly at the other. Our eyes remain downcast, focused on our bowls. This isn't coldness or discomfort. It's proper etiquette, the way things are done. Our gestures remain minimal, our breathing measured and quiet. When I finish, I place my chopsticks across the rim of my bowl with precision, perfectly parallel to the table's edge. The young man follows suit moments later, though his placement is slightly off-center. He will learn in time. We sit in stillness for several heartbeats longer. The faint pop of an ember in the hearth marks the passage of time. The silence holds weight, substance. It is not empty space to be filled, but a presence to be respected. I rise to my feet in one fluid motion, decades of practice allowing me to stand without awkwardness or hesitation. I offer no ceremony, no farewell words. The moment concludes as naturally as it began. The apprentice bows once, slowly, his forehead nearly touching the tatami. As he rises, he gathers the bowls with careful hands. The silence remains unbroken, but it carries understanding between us, more clear than any words could convey. I slide the shoji door aside, my palm pressing lightly against the wooden frame, so the door responds with a soft, familiar whisper, wood against wood, a sound as natural as breathing. Morning light floods in, not the harsh glare of midday, but something gentler, something that asks permission rather than demands attention. Before me stretches a narrow walkway bordered with moss-covered stones. The garden path winds between low shrubs, their leaves cupping tiny beads of dew. The morning air rushes to greet me, crisp enough to sharpen the senses but carrying sweetness too, the clean scent of wet earth and new growth. I slip my feet into Zori sandals waiting at the threshold. They fit perfectly, worn to the exact shape of my feet through countless journeys along this same path. As I step from the porch onto the first stone, the sandals tap against my heels, a quiet, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap. No hurry in the sound, just the natural cadence of a man walking with purpose but without urgency. To my left, a small thicket of bamboo rises, slender stalks reaching skyward. The wind finds its way through the leaves, stirring them gently. They brush against one another, creating a subtle music. Not quite a whisper, not quite a song. The sound follows me as I move forward, a living accompaniment to my journey. The stepping stones beneath my feet are placed with deliberate care, not so close that one might rush across them, not so far that one must leap. Each requires a conscious step, a moment of consideration. Moss creeps along their edges, softening their outlines, reclaiming what man has arranged. I place each foot with precision, feeling the cool, solid surface through my sandals. This garden speaks in silence. Every element, the carefully pruned pine, the rounded stones, the bamboo grove, exists not for display, but for contemplation. The curved path forces the eye to wander, to discover. The stone basin waits to catch both rain and attention. This space was designed not to impress visitors, but to quiet the mind of the one who walks through it daily. In the far corner, near the round stone basin, movement catches my eye. A small brown sparrow descends in a flutter of wings, landing at the water's edge. It hops once, twice, then dips into the water, splashing with evident pleasure. I stop completely. Not frozen, not startled, but fully present. My body settles into stillness without effort, a pause as natural as the spaces between breaths. I watch, nothing more. The sparrow flicks its wings, sending tiny droplets scattering across the water's surface. One drop, larger than the rest, rolls over the basin's edge and falls, striking a broad leaf below. The sound is almost imperceptible, a single note in the garden's quiet symphony. Something shifts in my face. Not a smile exactly, but a softening around the eyes. The constant vigilance required of my position eases, if only for this moment. The sparrow knows nothing of duty or honor or the weight of a family crest. It simply is, and in that being, offers a momentary lesson. The bird takes flight, startled by nothing I can perceive. I draw breath through my nose, filling my lungs completely, then continue along the path. My steps come slower now, more deliberate, as if the sparrow's brief presence has altered the very rhythm of my movement. Ahead, beneath the twisted branches of an ancient pine, stands a small wooden shrine. No larger than a merchant's traveling chest, it bears a roof of copper turned green with age. The pine's shadow dapples its surface, creating patterns that shift with the morning breeze. Before the shrine sits a small ceramic dish, the offering tray. Today it holds no rice, no coin, only a single fallen petal from the nearby plum tree. Its pink edge has begun to brown, curling slightly as it dries. I lower myself to one knee before the shrine, setting my sandals carefully beside the nearest stone. The motion is fluid, practiced, neither rushed nor hesitant. I make no sound, speak no prayer. None is needed in this conversation between a man and the spirits that guard his home. My bow comes slowly, deeply, with full intention. Not the quick nod of obligation, but the deliberate movement of genuine respect. Not for gods of thunder or war, but for something more intimate. The quiet guardians of this place, the ancestors whose blood flows in my veins, the day itself unfolding around me. As I rise, the pine above sways gently, its needles rustling in a sudden breath of wind. Whether spirit or simply air, I do not question. I rise, retrieve my sandals, and continue on my path, leaving the shrine exactly as I found it, attended but undisturbed. I pass through the small stone gate that separates my garden from the world beyond. The barrier isn't meant to keep intruders out. It merely marks the boundary between private contemplation and public duty. 3 stone steps lead down to a path of packed earth, still cool from the night. My sandals leave no sound here, just the faintest impression. The earth path gives way to stone as I approach the first bend. Kyoto unfolds before me like a scroll being slowly opened. Not all at once, but in careful measures. Each turn revealing another street, another alley, another life beginning its day. Around me, the city stirs. Shoji screens slide with soft wooden clacks, their paper surfaces glowing amber as interior lamps are lit. Wooden shutters rise on their hinges, propped open with bamboo poles. The sound carries. Not intrusive, but present. A rhythm of awakening. Through these openings spill rectangles of warm light that stretch across the stone path, laying gold atop gray. The ground beneath my feet holds the night's moisture. Each stone glistens with dew, catching the first true light of morning. My sandals leave dark prints that linger only briefly before fading, as if the path itself is drinking them away. I step carefully, not from fear of falling, but from habit. A samurai's footing must always be sure, even on a morning walk. The city breathes around me, not with the roar that will come by midday, but with the hushed intake of preparation. From a nearby home comes the rhythmic thump of firewood being stacked. A basket of chickens rustles as its owner lifts the covering cloth. The soft swish-swish of a straw broom against stone carries from 3 houses down. These sounds don't break the morning spell. They are the spell, the incantation that summons Kyoto to life each day. I walk ahead, maintaining the distance that is proper. Not so far that I cannot hear what passes behind me, not so close that I intrude upon the morning's private moments. The back of my robe sways slightly with each step, a metronome keeping time with the city's awakening pulse. Fresh dyes from Nara. The voice comes from my right, where a woman lifts bamboo shutters at her stall. Her call holds the rasp of sleep, as if her voice itself is only now awakening. Her movements are practiced but unhurried, the routine of years making her efficient even in her morning drowsiness. She unrolls bolts of silk across a wooden table worn smooth by years of similar displays. The fabrics cascade downward like frozen waterfalls, indigo blue deep as midnight, vermilion red bright as autumn maple, white pure as winter's first snow. The morning light catches each ripple and fold, transforming simple cloth into flowing water. 2 boys struggle past, each gripping one end of a heavy wooden crate. Their faces are pinched with effort, but their eyes dance with youth. "You walk like my grandmother," one teases, his voice breaking with the strain. "Your grandmother walks faster, the other retorts, stepping deliberately into a puddle that splashes them both. Their laughter cuts through the morning hush, a sound without apology. A single lantern still burns beside a doorway, overlooked in the transition from night to day. Its paper sides glow amber against the growing daylight, a small sun refusing to yield to the greater one. A merchant emerges, notices the waste, and with a quick puff of breath extinguishes the flame. The small curl of smoke rises, then disappears. Above the eaves, sparrows dart in complex patterns. They chase one another between rooftops, their wings catching sunlight as they bank and turn. Their chirps form a high counterpoint to the deeper rhythms below. They trace invisible lines across the sky, connecting one building to the next, weaving the separate structures into a single city. The scent reaches. The scent reaches me before I see its source. Fresh rice steam rising from a stall ahead. A cook stirs a large pot of miso, the broth releasing its own earthy perfume. Beside him sits a dog, patient and still, its eyes never leaving the cook's hands. The smell promises nourishment, not just to the body, but to the spirit, the most fundamental comfort of home. We pass the weaver's shop, its doorway open to the street. Inside, an old man pulls thread through a massive loom, each movement precise despite his age. The wooden frame creaks with every pull, a sound as old as craft itself. I glance inside, but do not pause. Some labors deserve the respect of being witnessed without interruption. A cart approaches, its single ox plodding steadily forward. Wooden wheels creak and squeal slightly against their axles. The driver, a weathered man whose face has seen as many seasons as I have, nods in silent greeting. His cargo, barrels bound tightly with rope, shifts slightly with each turn of the wheels. We need no words. The nod contains all necessary communication between men who understand duty. I find my pace slowing to match the rhythm around me. There is no need to rush in a city that moves with such intention. Each step, each gesture, each task unfolds with its own natural timing. To hurry would be to miss the point entirely. At a small crossroad, I pause, allowing the space between us to close. Ahead, the street curves gently rightward, where more stalls flicker to life like stars appearing at dusk. Kyoto has opened its eyes, but has not yet found its voice. The day's true conversation has yet to begin. I turn the corner and the morning's first true aromas wrap around me like a silk robe. Ocean salt from the fishmongers' stalls, grilled starch from vendors' braziers, and wood smoke from cooking fires, all mingling in the dense morning air. The scents have weight, substance, like the city itself is exhaling its first proper breath. Two fishmongers stand behind wooden slabs stained dark with years of use. Their blades move with a certainty born of thousands of identical mornings. Long silver mackerel lie before them, caught before dawn and still holding the coolness of the sea. The knives whisper through the flesh, a sound both delicate and final, then clap against the cutting board with rhythmic precision. The emperor himself doesn't eat better, one mutters, though the comment seems meant for no one. Fish scales scatter across the stone underfoot with each slice, catching the strengthening light like countless tiny mirrors. They glint like winter snow, then vanish beneath quick flicks of straw brooms wielded by children too young for more demanding tasks. The scales disappear, but their silver memory remains on the stones. An old vendor crouches nearby, his back curved like a bow. His weathered hands move with deliberate patience over a clay brazier where sweet potatoes rest on a metal grate. He fans the coals beneath with a woven paddle, each motion slow and precise. The skins of the potatoes crackle as they cook, releasing little puffs of steam into the cool morning air. The scent reaches me, earthy and warm, with the subtle sweetness of caramelizing sugar. It reminds me of autumn festivals, of roasted chestnuts and damp fallen leaves. The fragrance is both comfort and memory, wrapping around the present moment. Few words pass between the vendors. The rhythm of the morning is still settling into place, like a sword finding its proper balance. The sizzle of cooking food, the scrape of knives against wood. These are the market's opening lines, more eloquent than speech. To my right, a small wooden stand glows with faint color. A woman with hair streaked silver arranges incense sticks into neat rows. Each stick has been carefully molded into the shape of chrysanthemums and plum blossoms, fragrant sculptures that will disappear into smoke and memory. The scent from her stall is delicate but persistent. Powdered sandalwood forms the foundation, with dried petals and something faintly citrus-like building upon it. This refined fragrance somehow cuts through the brine and smoke around it, neither competing nor surrendering. I offer a slight nod as I pass. The incense seller returns it with the ghost of a smile, the quiet acknowledgement between people who have seen many mornings pass just like this one. No words needed. The gesture contains all that needs saying. As I continue walking, the incense clings faintly to my sleeve, a memory of that moment carried forward. Behind me, the market's hum begins to rise, still soft but waking. The day has begun its true unfolding. I leave the market's bustle behind, and the noise softens with each step toward the small stone bridge. The narrow canal beneath runs slow and dark, its surface occasionally broken by a leaf's gentle landing. A light breeze carries the scent of river moss and old paper, cleaner than the market's dense aromas, simpler somehow. The bridge itself is nothing remarkable. Worn stone, darkened by centuries of rain and fog. Yet there, at its corner, sits something that makes me slow my pace. A low wooden table rests beneath a paper umbrella, the color of autumn maple leaves. Sheets of rice paper flutter like trapped butterflies, their corners secured by small, polished river stones. Behind this humble display sits an elderly man, cross-legged on a thin cushion. His indigo kimono has faded to the color of evening shadows, yet his posture remains perfect, back straight as a temple pillar. He doesn't look up at my approach. His attention belongs entirely to the brush in his hand, moving across fresh paper with deliberate grace. The table before him displays dozens of poems, each no longer than 3 lines, arranged in neat rows. The calligraphy flows across each page, some characters bold and assertive, others delicate as spider silk. Each sheet contains a complete world in miniature. My feet stop without conscious command. I haven't spoken, haven't signaled any interest, yet here I stand. My eyes move across the display, not scanning for value or searching for meaning, but simply absorbing. Each poem seems to wait, patient as stones in a garden. The poet's brush whispers against fresh paper. He dips it into the shallow inkstone beside him, the excess ink releasing with a touch against the stone's edge. Another stroke, another character forms. Birth without sound. One haiku catches my eye, holds it. 9 simple words arranged in 3 lines. Plum blossoms fall. Still, the tea does not cool before it is gone. I stand motionless before these words. They need space to breathe, to exist fully before being touched. The moment stretches like shadow at dusk. With both hands, the way one might lift a newborn, I take the page. The paper feels alive between my fingers, its edges soft from humidity, the ink still slightly raised where it dried most recently. Not an object, but a living thing. The old poet glances up for the first time. His eyes meet mine briefly, then he offers a subtle nod. The gesture contains everything: acknowledgement, gratitude, blessing. Words would only diminish what passes between us. I reach into my sleeve and produce a single coin. Not tossed carelessly, but placed with precision onto the small ceramic dish at the edge of his table. The soft clink speaks its own language of respect. With careful movements, I fold the haiku, once horizontally, then once vertically. Each crease aligned exactly, each fold deliberate. the kind of care reserved for things that matter deeply, things that will be kept. The folded square disappears into the inner pocket of my robe, close to my chest, near enough to feel its presence with each breath. Before turning away, I look once more at the table of poems, not to select another, but to let the moment settle into memory. The poet has already returned to his brush, to the eternal conversation between ink and paper. I continue across the bridge, the poem's words settling into my thoughts like stones in a garden pond. Long after the paper is hidden, the feeling of the verse remains, like incense that perfumes the air long after the stick has burned away. I cross the bridge, my fingers still feeling the texture of the poem now nestled against my chest. The city welcomes me back with its murmurs and movement. Vendors calling prices, children darting between stalls, the constant rustle of silk and cotton as bodies pass. Then, a sound emerges from the street ahead. High and clear, a single bell chimes in perfect rhythm, like the measured pulse of a heart at rest. Ting, ting, ting. My feet stop without conscious command. The sound demands nothing, yet receives everything, my attention, my stillness, my breath. The street around me quiets, not in sudden hush, but in gradual surrender, as if the bell has reminded everyone of something they'd momentarily forgotten. From around a corner, he appears, a solitary figure walking the center of the path, each step deliberate as calligraphy. His saffron-brown robes hang loose but dignified, his head shaved to gleaming in the morning light. His bare feet meet the stone with a knowledge that seems older than his years. The source of the sound hangs from his walking staff, a small brass bell no larger than a plum, swaying with each measured step. Its voice is modest, yet penetrates deeper than the market's clamor ever could. The sound seems to bypass my ears entirely, speaking directly to something beneath thought. His lips move in continuous prayer, the words flowing like water over stone. They reach me in fragments, carried on the morning air. Namu, Amida, Butsu. The Nembutsu, the sacred invocation, not performed for audience or effect, simply offered to the space between heaven and earth. His eyes remain lowered, never seeking connection, yet somehow connecting with everything. He walks as if his journey and destination are the same thing. His presence asks for nothing, yet in its asking for nothing, offers everything. A moment of stillness in Kyoto's flowing river of commerce and conversation. I lower my head slightly. Not the formal bow of court ritual, but something more genuine. One traveler acknowledging another on the endless road. My gesture contains no performance, only recognition. Across the street, an old woman places a small wooden cup of rice beside her doorway. She makes no announcement, seeks no credit. The offering appears as naturally as dew on morning grass, both routine and sacred. Without breaking his stride or interrupting his chant, the monk bends with fluid grace. His hands, both hands, never just one, receive the cup. The movement completes itself, and he continues forward, his prayer unbroken. The crowd parts for him without instruction. Children stop their games, their faces suddenly solemn with intuitive understanding. Merchants pause mid-transaction. The city itself seems to breathe in, making space for this walking meditation. Some close their eyes briefly, others bow their heads. No one speaks. As he draws nearer, I notice his feet, calloused but precise in their placement. Each step lands fully present, not hurried toward the next moment, nor lingering in the last. He walks not to arrive somewhere else, but to be exactly where he is. He passes before me, and for a moment his shadow crosses mine on the stone path. The intersection feels significant somehow, like water meeting water, two currents briefly touching, then continuing their separate journeys. With each step that carries him away, the bell's voice grows fainter, not abruptly silenced, but gradually absorbed into the city's returning murmur. Even when I can no longer distinguish it from the market's sounds, something of its resonance remains in the air. The chant, too, fades from hearing, but not from memory. Like incense that perfumes a room long after the ember dies, the nembutsu lingers in the mind's ear. Namu Amida Butsu. I take a breath and find it changed somehow. I resume my walk, but my pace has slowed without conscious decision. My steps fall more deliberately on the stone path. The world hasn't changed, yet everything seems more vivid, more present. The grain of wood on a merchant's stall, the pattern of clouds above the temple roof, the weight of the poem against my chest. Not from thought, but from reverence. As if the monk's passing has reminded me that every stone, every breath, every moment is sacred when fully attended to. I leave the busy street behind, turning down a narrow passage where the buildings lean close like old friends sharing secrets. The monk's passing has left me centered, my steps more deliberate. Ahead stands my destination, a simple wooden gate nestled between weathered stone walls. Nothing marks it as special, no sign, no ornament. Only those who need to find it ever do. My hand finds the familiar worn spot on the gate's edge. I slide it open with practiced care. The sound is gentle. Not a creak, just the faint knock of wood meeting wood as the gate reaches its rest. I step inside and close the world behind me. The courtyard embraces me with enclosed silence. Here the walls rise high enough to hush the sounds of Kyoto's commerce. The distant cries of merchants, the clatter of carts, all fade to whispers. Wind flows gently over the top of the walls, bringing nothing but itself. I hear only breath and breeze, the two oldest songs in the world. I look down at the ground beneath my feet. The dirt has been freshly raked that morning into wide, perfect circles, concentric rings that ripple outward like stone dropped in still water. Each line speaks of patience, of ritual, of the hand that drew it before dawn. My feet find the narrow path that crosses this pattern, disturbing none of it. Each step belongs exactly where it falls. Overhead, several crooked pine trees lean toward the center of the yard, their trunks twisted by years of patient growth. Their needles drop slowly, almost reverently, into the courtyard below. As they fall, they release a dry, sweet scent of pine resin that fills the air. The perfume of constancy, of quiet strength. Against the far wall rests a simple wooden rack. It holds several bokken, practice swords worn smooth by countless hands. Each bears the marks of use, nicks and polished spots where palms have gripped them through seasons of training. I approach without hurry. My hand hovers over them, feeling rather than seeing which one calls to me today. My fingers close around one, slightly heavier than the others, its grain worn to silk by years of contact with my palm. Before beginning, I take my place at the center of the circles. I plant my feet shoulder-width apart, letting my weight sink into the earth. My eyes close, my shoulders drop, releasing tension I didn't know I carried. One breath in, drawing the world inside. One breath out, offering myself to the space. The air accepts my presence without judgment. I raise the bokken, not with aggression, but with statement. This is not a weapon in my hands, but an extension of intent. The wooden blade arcs upward, catching a sliver of morning light along its edge. It hangs there, balanced between earth and sky. The first form begins. My movements are slow, rooted, deliberate. Each motion carves shape into stillness, defining space that was empty a moment before. My arms and legs remember what my mind need not direct. The form flows through me like water seeking its natural course. My feet turn, shift, pivot. The sand underfoot responds with a soft crunch, a whisper of friction between soul and ground. The sound is like brush on paper, each step a character being written in a language older than words. I turn with measured control, lowering the blade in a smooth arc that parts the air without disturbing it. My arms move as if remembering the shape of water, flowing around obstacles that exist only in memory. The bokken finds positions it has known for decades, stopping precisely where intention meets execution. The air shifts around me, responding to my passage through it. The space itself becomes my partner in this dance, yielding, then supporting, then yielding again. Like wind through tall grass, my movement reshapes silence into form. Throughout it all, my face remains calm. No strain marks my brow, no grimace tightens my jaw. Just a soft focus in my eyes that looks through the walls and into memory, seeing opponents long gone, battles long decided, lessons learned in blood and sweat. A single pine needle falls from above, spinning lazily through sunlight. It lands beside my foot in the sand. I don't flinch or break rhythm. Its landing feels ordained, part of the form itself, nature adding its voice to the dialogue between body and space. Mid-strike, I freeze. The bokken hangs suspended between heaven and earth, caught in the space between intention and completion. Not from doubt or weakness, but from absolute control. My body becomes a living statue, every muscle held in perfect tension. The air around the blade seems to bend, waiting. My chest rises, drawing in the cool morning air. Pine scent fills my lungs, then falls, releasing without haste. This breath is neither dramatic nor forced. It simply is. The movements of my form wait for the breath to complete its journey, not the other way around. The breath commands, the body follows. I begin again, this time even slower. Where before there was deliberation, now there is reverence. Each step plants into the earth with the weight of mountains. Each turn of my wrist unfolds like a flower opening at dawn. Between each motion lies a universe of stillness. The bokken traces arcs through the air that seem to linger after it passes. The blade meets invisible resistance, yet requires no force to overcome it. The strike is clear, clean, like the single brushstroke of a master calligrapher who has spent decades learning to draw one perfect line. Power means nothing without precision. The cut is true not because of strength, but because of clarity. The blade must not outpace the breath, and the hand must not outpace the heart. My eyes remain soft, unfocused on any particular point. There is no target before me, no enemy to defeat. The battle exists only within, against imperfection, against haste, against the desire to impress. My gaze turns inward where the true discipline lives. The sword is not the first word. It is the last word, spoken only when silence cannot hold. No one watches. No one judges. The courtyard remains empty save for myself and the morning light. Yet the kata unfolds with the same precision it would before the emperor himself, perhaps with more. The truest test of character lies in what we do when no one is watching. The final cut descends, cleaving the air with quiet certainty. My feet return to their starting position, completing the circle. My body does not bow, yet something in the quality of the silence suggests a profound reverence. The courtyard itself seems to acknowledge what has transpired. One final breath fills my lungs. Complete, whole. I lower the bokken to my side, letting the tension flow from my shoulders like water finding its level. The form has ended, but its echo remains, hanging in the air like the last note of a temple bell. I feel his presence before I see him. The stillness I cultivated shatters, not like glass, but like ripples across water. My apprentice enters the courtyard, his footsteps breaking the pattern of silence I've woven. He moves with determination, though his body lacks the fluid grace that comes only with years. The courtyard now holds two rhythms, mine settled and deep, his eager and uncertain. He crosses to stand before me and bows, a deep gesture that folds his body nearly in half. I notice the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremble in his fingertips. This moment matters to him. The weight of his own expectations presses down on his spine. His bare feet shift on the raked dirt as he prepares for the balanced drill. The earth bears his imprint differently than mine, deeper, more urgent. He positions himself, one leg raised, wooden bokken extended forward. His core tightens visibly beneath his training garments. I take 2 steps back. The space between us grows, not from indifference, but from respect. Words would only cloud what must be learned through the body. My role shifts from participant to witness. He begins the drill. His raised leg wavers slightly. The wooden blade dips and rises like a boat on troubled water. His breath comes quick and shallow, fighting against his balance rather than supporting it. I watch him without judgment. My eyes remain soft, seeking not perfection, but truth. I track the angle of his shoulders, the tilt in his hips, the white-knuckled grip on his bokken. Each tells its own story. Without a word, I raise one hand and tilt it slightly leftward. The gesture is minimal, a suggestion rather than a command. He adjusts, his posture shifting subtly in response. Above us, pine branches sway in a sudden breeze. The wind doesn't intrude on our practice. It joins it, testing my apprentice with nature's own breath. His eyes flicker upward momentarily. That brief distraction costs him. His stance falters, raised foot wavering, the bokken dips sharply. His jaw clenches in frustration, but it's too late. His center collapses and his foot returns to earth. I step forward silently. No sigh escapes me, no clicking of tongue against teeth. Just calm movement closing the distance between us. He looks away, shame coloring his features. My hand finds his shoulder, not to correct, not to command, just to anchor him to this moment, to remind him that failure is merely another form of practice. We breathe together. Slowly. His chest stops its rapid rise and fall, matching my own measured rhythm. His head bows slightly, acceptance replacing frustration. I withdraw my hand and step back to my place, not turning away, but offering him the space to try again. Trust hangs between us like the morning mist. He begins once more. This time his movements come slower, less forced. The desperate need to impress falls away from him like shed armor. His raised leg holds steady, the bokken wavers less. In silence, the greatest lessons settle deepest. A hand on the shoulder can weigh more than 100 words. I kneel in the corner of my home where shadows gather like quiet companions. The shoji screens filter the midday light, transforming harsh sunlight into something gentle and diffuse. This corner has become my sanctuary, a place where time slows and breath deepens. Across my lap lies my wakizashi, not my primary weapon, but in many ways the more intimate one. While my katana stands in its rack, this shorter blade never leaves my side. It has witnessed more of my life than any living person. The cloth in my right hand feels cool against my fingertips. I dipped it in camellia oil earlier, just enough to leave a faint sheen. The scent rises subtly, sweet yet herbaceous, like summer grass at dusk. It is a smell I've known since boyhood when my father first taught me this ritual. I begin not with the edge, but with the spine. Many warriors rush to sharpen, eager for results. They miss the true purpose. I run the cloth along the back of the blade where no blood has ever touched. This isn't merely cleaning, it's acknowledgement. Recognition of the blade's full nature, not just its capacity to cut. My movements are small, precise. The cloth travels in arcs no wider than a fingertip. My hands know this dance without instruction, have performed it thousands of times across decades. The ritual lives in my muscles and bones, not in my thoughts. The room holds perfect stillness. No footfall disturbs the wooden planks, no voice breaks the air, only the whisper of oiled cloth against steel punctuates the silence. Occasionally the floor beneath me creaks. the house speaking its own quiet language. With practiced care, I turn the blade over. The motion requires no thought. My fingers understand the weight, the balance, the exact pressure needed. The wakizashi rotates in my hands as naturally as a leaf turns in the wind. There is no hurry here. Haste has no place in communion with steel. I reach for the wet stone. Drawing it across the edge produces a sound so subtle it exists somewhere between hearing and feeling. The stone sings against the metal. Not a scrape, but a hum, a vibration that travels through my fingertips and into my chest. Between each pull of the stone, my breath pauses. Not from effort or concentration, but from reverence. In those suspended moments, the steel speaks its own truth. I listen with my hands, with the silence between my heartbeats. This blade was not meant for vengeance. It was made to end only what must not continue. I place a single drop of oil along the newly honed edge. The amber liquid catches light, becomes a tiny sun. With the cloth, I spread it evenly, sealing the steel as one might seal a sacred text. The oil doesn't merely protect against rust, it preserves intention. Lifting the blade, I turn it slightly. Morning light catches the edge, revealing its true nature. I'm not seeking perfection. I seek harmony. My eyes trace the steel not as a craftsman hunting flaws, but as a father might gaze upon a sleeping child. What matters is not flawlessness, but integrity. With a sound like a final exhalation, the wakizashi slides back into its lacquered sheath. The click is soft, yet definitive, the closing note of a prayer offered without words. I remain still. My hands rest on my thighs, palms upward. My eyes close. The moment settles around me like snow, each second adding weight and meaning to the silence. The ritual doesn't end with the sheathing. It continues in this stillness, this waiting. Some acts require no witness, only patience, breath, and intention, drawn not from the blade, but from the soul. I leave the quiet sanctuary of my home, the weight of my freshly tended blade a familiar presence at my hip. The midday sun has climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across Kyoto's busy streets. My errands take me toward the marketplace where the silk merchants gather. From a distance, I spot the stall, its pale purple awning like a floating cloud against the harder edges of surrounding shops. The fabric bolts hang in cascades of color, blush pinks soft as dawn, storm grays deep as winter skies, indigos vibrant as summer nights. They sway in the gentle breeze, these frozen waterfalls of silk, each movement revealing new patterns caught in the light. I step beneath the canopy. The world shifts, cooler, quieter, as if I've walked into a different realm. The marketplace clamor recedes. Here, the air carries traces of dye, earthy indigo, floral safflower, and the faint smoke that lingers after the boiling of bark and roots. These scents tell stories of craft passed through generations. Behind a low table kneels a girl, 16 at most, dressed in a faded blue yukata that speaks of daily wear. Her movements catch my eye immediately. She sorts fabric with the intentional grace of ceremony, not mere commerce. Each bolt receives her full attention as she rolls it tight, secures it with a hemp ribbon, and places it precisely among its fellows. Her hands move with the economy of purpose I recognize in master swordsmen. She notices my presence. Her eyes lift, and a smile forms. Not the broad grin of a merchant eager for coin, but something genuine and measured. The corners of her mouth lift just enough to show warmth without abandoning dignity. "Welcome," she says, bowing shallowly from her seated position, hands coming together before her. Her voice carries no more weight than a falling leaf. The fabrics around me tell the story of seasons. Spring silks glow with pale greens and plum pinks that remind me of the first buds on bare branches. Summer patterns shimmer with blues that capture the play of light on river water. Autumn brings rust and ochre hues that echo maple leaves turning. Winter fabrics gleam with silver thread woven through deeper colors, frost on night-dark fields. She reaches for a bolt of crimson silk, her sleeve riding up just enough to reveal what she'd rather hide. A patch of shiny pink skin across the back of her hand. A dyer's burn, still healing. The girl's hand drops quickly to her lap, tugging her sleeve lower. The motion is instinctive, practiced. She's done this many times. Without pause or acknowledgement of what's been revealed, she continues her work, dignity intact. I catch her eye for just a moment, enough to recognize her strength, not enough to shame her by noticing what she wishes to conceal. I look away, turning my attention to the fabrics. This pattern, she says, lifting a bolt of pale blue silk crossed with darker lines, is called River Mist. Her voice carries the cadence of poetry. She touches another, deep indigo with threads of gold woven through. And this is First Firefly. The names float between us like incense smoke, more whispered than spoken, each one a small world of meaning. A small boy darts past the stall, pausing to wave at the girl. For him, her smile widens, transforming her face. This smile holds no restraint. It's the kind reserved for children, unburdened by the weight of adult concerns. The boy continues on his way, and her expression returns to its gentle composure. As I move among the bolts, her eyes follow, not with the hunger of a merchant tracking potential profit, but with something more like hope. She watches as if my discovery of beauty would please her more than any sale. Her gaze holds the patience of someone who understands that the right fabric, like the right words, finds its owner in its own time. I touch nothing, buy nothing today. Yet when I prepare to leave, I offer a small bow. She returns it, eyes crinkling slightly at the corners with quiet pride in her craft. As I step back into the sunlight, a breeze lifts through the stall. Behind me, the silks flutter and dance, spirits in cloth form, celebrating their keeper's quiet dignity. I left the cloth seller's stall, continuing my walk through the merchant quarter. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the narrow alleys between buildings, transforming the ordinary into something more mysterious. A movement caught my eye. A sliding door ajar in a narrow passageway I'd passed 100 times before. Golden light spilled through the gap, tinted by silk curtains that transformed harsh sunlight into something honeyed and warm. I slowed my steps. Through that narrow opening, a world revealed itself, a room perfectly still, like a painting captured between brush strokes. The tatami floor lay immaculate, not a speck of dust visible. A mirror leaned against the far wall, surrounded by small ceramic dishes containing pigments in shades of white, red, and black. The air seemed suspended, waiting. Kneeling before the mirror was Aya. Her back formed a perfect line, knees folded beneath her with practiced precision. She wore only a simple white underrobe, her shoulders exposed. Her hair fell straight and black down her back, not yet arranged into the elaborate style she would soon wear. This was the private moment between who she was and who she would become. In her right hand, she held a fine brush with a bamboo handle worn smooth by years of use. With measured movements, she dipped it into white paint, then drew it across her cheek in a single, fluid stroke. The paint settled into the hollow beneath her eye, transforming her face into something otherworldly. Each application was deliberate, a composition rather than concealment. Her lips moved as she worked, whispering words I could just barely hear. Evening mist rises, the moon waits behind the screen, so I wait with her. The verse floated out into the alley like incense smoke, carried on her breath. She repeated it, a mantra accompanying each stroke of the brush. Once satisfied with the foundation, she set the brush down and reached for her obi, a sash of crimson and gold brocade that caught the lamplight and seemed to glow from within. She wrapped it around her waist with practiced motions, each fold falling exactly where it should. As she pulled the fabric tight, I saw her exhale, not from the constriction, but from readiness. It was the breath a swordsman takes before drawing his blade, the moment of centering before action. Beside her, on a lacquered stand, rested a shamisen. Its body gleamed dark and polished, the ivory bridge catching light like a sliver of moon. Her hand moved toward it with the natural grace of long familiarity. She lifted the instrument not as an object, but as an extension of herself. Her fingers found their places on the strings without looking, muscle memory guiding them home. With her other hand, she took up the bachi pick, its edge worn smooth from countless performances. A single pluck broke the silence. One note, crisp and hollow, resonating through the small room. The sound filled the space completely, yet remained contained, like water filling a cup exactly to its brim. The note hung in the air between us, then faded. Throughout all this, she never glanced toward the partially open door. Either she hadn't noticed my presence, or, more likely, she had chosen to allow this moment to remain uninterrupted, a gift neither acknowledged nor refused. I lingered only a moment longer, then continued on my way. Whatever I once knew of this world of art and transformation, I carried it now as silently as she carried her craft. Behind me came the soft rustle of fabric. Another geisha appeared, sliding the screen closed with gentle hands. The vision disappeared, returned to privacy. But her whispered poem stayed with me as I walked on, like the lingering note of her shamisen. Evening mist rises. I parted the heavy canvas curtain with one hand, stepping from bright afternoon into the muted world of the armor crafter's shop. The transition was immediate. Light dimmed, sounds softened, and my senses filled with the familiar smell of scorched iron and pine oil that had greeted me for 20 years. The shop felt alive with warmth. Not the oppressive heat of summer, but something lived in and constant, like breath itself. The thick timber walls held memories as much as they held heat. Somewhere deeper within the building, a rhythm started and stopped. The distinctive sound of metal being shaped by practiced hands, dulled by distance and thick walls. I moved through the front room, past stands holding partial sets of armor awaiting repair or collection. Each piece told its own story: a dented helmet, a shoulder guard with replacement lacings, a chest plate polished to reveal its grain once more. In the workshop beyond, beneath a shaft of dust-filled light that fell from a high window, the old man hunched over his work, his broad back curved toward a half-polished kabuto, its metals shaped like a perfect wave frozen at its crest. His hands, scarred from decades of burns and cuts, moved with the steadiness that only comes from making the same motion 10,000 times. I did not announce myself. Such interruption would be unnecessary, even disrespectful. Instead, I stepped to the side of the doorway, rested my hand against a worn wooden beam, and waited. My breath slowed to match the rhythm of his work. In this place, patience was not a virtue, but a requirement. The crafter pressed the curved steel against a rotating polishing stone. Each contact birthed a spray of orange sparks that danced briefly in the air like fireflies before vanishing into the dark floorboards. The stone hummed, the metal sang, and together they created a music older than either of us. After several minutes, the old man's hands stilled. He didn't turn, didn't speak, but simply lifted his eyes to the wall before him. Then, with the deliberate movement of a man who has never needed to rush, he glanced over his shoulder. No surprise registered on his weathered face, no greeting passed his lips, just a slow nod, the kind reserved for someone who has stood in your shoes. I bowed in return, deeper than protocol demanded. My gesture was not for formality, but for respect. not just for the man, but for the work that surrounded us, for the tradition his hands preserved. Behind him, tools hung from hooks arranged in perfect order. Chisels, tongs, hammers, lacquer brushes. Each had its place. Each carried history in its worn handles and polished edges. Each could tell stories of armor made and mended, of battles survived through their craft. Without speaking, the old man reached for a piece resting on his workbench, a shoulder guard, recently blackened and repaired. He held it out to me, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. I took it, turning it slowly in my hands. My fingers traced the hammered ridges, feeling where new metal had been joined to old. The cord had been replaced with fresh silk, dyed the same indigo as the original. The repair was visible but honorable, like a scar earned in service. We spoke through breath, through nods, through the pauses between movements. Our language was the space between tasks, shaped by discipline, not sentences. In 20 years, we had exchanged perhaps 100 words, yet understood each other completely. I tested the strap with a gentle tug. It held firm against my pull. I nodded once. Approval without flattery, the kind of gesture only a fellow craftsman would recognize. They do not speak of battles. The armor remembers them. That is enough. With no ceremony, the old man sat once more and returned to his polishing. The wheels spun, the sparks flew. His work was less like labor and more like prayer, each motion an offering to something greater than himself. I watched for a moment longer, not to say anything, but to be reminded of strength, of time, of the way things endure when they are built right. Then I bowed once more, stepped back through the curtain, and disappeared into the light. Behind me, the sound of polishing resumed, unchanged, continuing as it had before I arrived and as it would after I was gone. I turned to leave, my sandals nearly at the threshold, when something caught my eye. A stray beam of afternoon light slipped through a high window, landing on a humble object nestled among iron scraps and lacquer tins on a shelf. The sudden, unexpected glint of gold drew me back like a whisper. There, amid the tools of war and protection, sat a simple clay tea bowl. Its surface was worn smooth by years of use, the glaze faded to the color of autumn leaves. But what held my attention were the fractures, delicate cracks that ran across its surface like a map of rivers. Each break had been meticulously filled with golden lacquer that caught the light and held it. I stepped closer, drawn by some quiet magnetism. Without touching it, I leaned in to study the pattern. The gold didn't merely seal the breaks, it transformed them. The lines weren't random, but seemed to tell a story, like calligraphy written by time itself. The old crafter continued his work behind me, the wheel spinning, metal kissing stone. Then the sound stopped. I heard him wipe his hands slowly on a cloth, his movements unhurried. He knew precisely what had captured my attention. "It broke during a storm," he said, his voice low and textured like worn leather. "It fell from my work table. Years ago." I turned to face him, my eyes still carrying the reflection of those golden veins. I said nothing at first, just observed the careful repairs, the patience evident in each seam. Not an attempt to hide the damage, but to embrace it. "You repaired it in gold," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. The artisan nodded, approaching to stand beside me. He reached up and brushed a calloused thumb over the rim of the bowl. "Cracks remembered our strength," he said, a faint smile lifting the corners of his weathered face. "We mend what matters with gold, not to hide the wound, but to honor it." I fell silent, letting his words settle. In that moment, the clanging of the whetstone and the iron dust dancing in sunbeams seemed to fade away. All that remained was this vessel, broken, rejoined, reborn into something more meaningful than its original form. What is mended with care becomes more beautiful. What breaks may one day shine again, not despite the wound, but because of it. My hand lifted, fingers reaching toward the bowl, then stopped short. Some things, like memories and mended porcelain, are only meant to be looked at. The lesson was in the seeing, not the touching. The old man reached up and carefully moved the bowl deeper into the shadows of the shelf. Not hiding it, just returning it to its resting place. Even there, the gold caught what little light reached it. Our eyes met. No words passed between us, yet understanding flowed. We both carried our own cracks, and we both continued. I bowed then, deeper than before, not from obligation or custom, but from humility, a silent gratitude for a lesson never spoken aloud, only shown. The door slid closed behind me as I stepped once more into the street. Behind me, for just a moment, the light caught that golden repair one final time, a quiet reminder that even what breaks can glow. I chose the quieter path home, away from the market's noise and the city's pulse. My sandals found the worn dirt track that curved along the eastern edge of town, where cypress and pine stood like ancient sentinels. The trees leaned close overhead, their branches creating a living ceiling that scattered sunlight in dappled patterns across my path. Each step brought the scent of resin and earth. The town's clamor faded behind me. Here, the world narrowed to simpler elements: light, shadow, breath, and the rhythm of my own footfall. I heard it before I saw him. A quiet, rhythmic rasp that carried through the still air, metal gliding against stone in unhurried strokes, not the hasty sharpening of a man preparing for immediate use, nor the showy technique of one who wishes to be observed. This was the sound of habit, of ritual, of necessity. The path curved, and there he sat. At the base of a leaning pine, a man rested with his back against the rough bark. His katana lay across his lap, hands moving with practiced precision as he drew the blade across a wet stone. His clothing was travel-worn, the edges frayed from nights spent under open sky. No clan crest marked his shoulders or chest. A sword without a banner. His hair hung loosely tied, not in the careful topknot I maintained each morning. Not defiance, merely practicality. The kind of arrangement made by a man who had slept rough for many seasons, who had no lord to impress, no position to maintain. As I passed, his movements slowed. He looked up. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. No alarm registered in his face, no curiosity, just a momentary stillness between us, a pause that needed no words. His eyes carried the weight of battles fought, of oaths broken or lost. "I know the weight you carry," that look seemed to say. I said nothing. He offered no greeting. The silence between us wasn't cold or wary. It was respected. We were two men who had stood in similar places, now walking separate branches of the same tree. I slowed my pace, just slightly. Not enough to suggest I would stop. Just enough to acknowledge what passed between us in that glance. He nodded once. A slight incline of his head. Not submission, not deference. Just the smallest signal of recognition between equals. The Ronin resumed his task, dragging the blade slowly across the stone. The sound filled the space between us, a high, thin note that hung in the air like a whisper of unfinished business, of roads not taken. I walked on. I did not turn back. There was no tension in the moment, no threat or challenge, just a thread that tugged between us and released, a silent reunion of men who had never met. Some brothers are never met by name, only by silence and the sound of steel drawn in the same wind. A pine needle fell, drifting lazy and silent between us. It touched the ground with no more sound than a breath, yet somehow it marked the moment more clearly than any temple bell. The Ronin was already forgotten by the world around him. The town had no place for masterless men, but he was not forgotten by me. As I continued along the path, The thought lingered of what might have been, or what still could be, in another season, another life. My gaze lowered briefly. Not in shame, not in sadness, but in memory. A quiet honoring of paths diverged, but never truly separate. The wind moved through the pines, stirring their branches. A crow called in the distance, its voice carrying over the treetops. And I continued my walk, the Ronin's presence trailing behind me like an echo, fading with each step, but never quite gone. I continued on my path through the market, passing food stalls and cloth merchants. Between a sack shop with its sweet-sour aroma and a spice seller's display of colorful powders, I spotted a modest corner stall built of cypress and rope. The tea merchant had arranged his wares with deliberate care. Bundles of leaves tied in twine, small drawers filled with fragrant dust, each placement intentional as a brush stroke. Steam curled from a cast iron kettle behind the stall, carrying notes of roasted sencha, grass, smoke, and sun-dried earth mingled in the air. The scent wrapped around passers-by like a warm scarf, drawing them closer without a word spoken. I breathed deeply, letting the aroma settle in my lungs before releasing it. The merchant, a man in his 60s with a beard like moss growing on stone, lifted a small, lacquered scale from beneath his counter. Its beam was balanced with string, its weights hand-carved from river stones worn smooth by years of water and time. He held it with reverence, as if weighing not just tea but something far more valuable. Across from him stood a boy, no more than 10, eyes wide with fascination. His small hands clutched a few copper coins so tightly his knuckles paled. The merchant smiled at him, then began to spoon long, curled leaves into a paper pouch. Spoon by spoon, the scale tipped. Each addition made the beam dip lower, the weights shifting in delicate increments. The scale creaked softly, wood groaning like a whisper from an old forest, telling secrets only those who listened could hear. I slowed my steps, drawn by that sound. Something in that quiet creak pulled at me, made me turn my head slightly, listening more intently than the moment seemed to require. The merchant's hand halted mid-air. Instead of finishing the measure, he held up his palm and stopped, though the weight wasn't yet full. His smile deepened, creating a map of wrinkles around his eyes. "Too much tea drowns the truth," he offered, voice as soft as the steam behind him. Not a scolding, a teaching. His eyes stayed on the boy, but his voice seemed to float outward, meant for more ears than just the child's. The boy blinked, then nodded solemnly. Not fully understanding, but sensing the gravity of the moment, he accepted the pouch like a gift rather than a purchase, holding it carefully with both hands. I lowered my gaze, just slightly. The phrase landed with quiet force. I didn't speak, but I understood. The message wasn't only for the child. The scale reset with a click as the merchant emptied the tray and moved the river stone back into place. The beam floated even again, balanced perfectly between what was needed and what was excess. The dried leaves rustled in their pouch as the boy tied it with a simple red string. A faint sound, as if remembering the field they came from, the wind that once moved through them when they were still part of the living world. As the boy left, the old man bowed slightly. Not the bow of business, but the quiet respect one offers to a future tea drinker, one who might someday understand what he had been taught. I walked on with the phrase turning in my mind. Too much tea drowns the truth. Not just about tea, I thought. About force, about silence, about the weight of all things in life. The creak of the scale lingered in my ears as I moved away, like the closing line of a haiku. Measured things weigh more than they seem. I left the tea merchant behind, his words still lingering in my thoughts. A warm breeze guided me toward an open storefront a few buildings away. The wide entrance revealed rows of wooden racks arranged with meticulous care, inviting passers-by to enter. I stepped inside, drawn by the air, dry and faintly sweet with the mingled scents of starch and sunlight. Dozens of translucent rice paper sheets hung from strings across the ceiling like pale sails. They fluttered gently, catching the morning light that streamed through the high windows. Each sheet glowed with inner luminescence, delicate as dragonfly wings suspended in mid-flight. The shop existed in a state of perfect stillness, not emptiness, but the rare quiet that comes from complete focus. Only the soft flapping of paper against paper and occasional tap of wooden frames disturbed the silence. I breathed slowly, matching my rhythm to the shop's hushed atmosphere. Near one of the central racks stood a boy, no older than 7. An oversized apron hung from his small shoulders, nearly reaching his ankles. His brows furrowed in concentration as he stared at a single sheet of paper, holding it as if it were made of breath itself. His fingers trembled slightly at the corners. Kneeling beside him, a woman, his mother, I presumed, watched with patient eyes. Her hands were clean but calloused, bearing the marks of her craft. She made no move to rush him or correct harshly. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper, not with fingers, with the palms. She demonstrated, sliding her palms underneath the sheet and lifting it as if balancing a cloud. The boy watched closely, absorbing every subtle movement. He tried again. The paper bent slightly as he lifted it, a small crease threatening to form across its perfect surface. His mouth tightened with disappointment. Instead of scolding, the mother smiled. She gently took the sheet, placed it flat again, and smoothed the curve with careful fingers. Her eyes held nothing but kindness, her patience unbroken. "Even paper remembers how it's held," she said. "Even paper remembers how it's held." The phrase echoed in my mind, a truth about more than just paper. The boy inhaled deeply, then tried once more. This time he breathed first, positioned his palms with care, and lifted slowly. The paper rose clean from the rack, floating just above the wood. A small, proud smile flickered across his face. Sunlight caught the floating sheet, illuminating every fiber within. The paper glowed golden, revealing its inner structure, countless strands swirling like a silent storm frozen in place. The mother pressed her hands together and nodded, not with pride, but with quiet gratitude. A shared success, a lesson passed like an heirloom. I remained at the doorway, watching. Something in my face softened. Perhaps I remembered similar lessons from my youth. Perhaps I wished I had. I continued past the paper shop, drawn toward a narrow window across the way. A shaft of midday light cut through the space, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. Through the wide-open shutter, I glimpsed an old man seated at a low writing desk. His back curved like a bow drawn halfway, hunched over his work. The sunlight fell across his parchment and weathered hands alike, turning both the same shade of amber. I slowed my pace. The air around his window carried a rich, complex scent. The sharp tang of sumi ink, the dry sweetness of aged wood, and the musty perfume of old scrolls. The smell transported me instantly to my youth in the temple school, where time seemed measured not in hours, but in the drying of ink strokes. Something about this place felt preserved, as if caught in amber, like a thought held too long before being spoken. On a lacquered tray beside his right hand, a dozen calligraphy brushes lay fanned out with the precision of a warrior's knife collection. Some were thin as needles, suitable for the finest detail work. Others thick as young bamboo stalks, meant for bold strokes that captured the essence of things. Each had been meticulously washed, the bristles perfectly shaped, then placed with deliberate care. The scroll before him rippled slightly at its edges, held in place by smooth river stones that anchored each corner. Parts of the ink still glistened wetly in the light, a correction in progress. I could see where he had scratched away a character and rewritten it, the new mark darker and more decisive than those around it. His fingertips were smudged with black, the skin around his nails stained from decades of such work. Though he handled his tools with the precision of a surgeon, his hands betrayed his lifelong devotion to the craft. His nails were cut short, practical, and his knuckles bore the permanent shadow of ink that no amount of scrubbing would remove. "A blade of grass remembers wind," he muttered under his breath, so softly I nearly missed it. Then again, with slight variation, "A blade of grass remembers wind, or forgets." I slowed outside his threshold, listening. I did not step in. This was not a performance meant for an audience. But I lingered, like one who overhears a prayer and pauses out of respect. He scratched out a kanji and rewrote it with confident strokes. His eyes narrowed as he examined his work, then softened. A smile crossed his face. Not the smile of pride, but the quiet satisfaction of one who has reached for something elusive and perhaps, for a moment, touched it. He dipped his brush again, adding just a dot, barely a mark at all. But to him, it completed the thought, like the final pebble placed at the end of a garden path. The sun shifted slightly, glinting off the lacquered handles of his brushes. They caught the light like silver blades. These were not mere tools, but instruments of memory, sharpened through years of solitude and practice. The old man coughed once, paused, then reached for a cup beside him. The porcelain was chipped at the rim, stained faintly brown from countless servings of tea. He lifted it with both hands, sipped slowly, then set it down with a quiet sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his years. I nodded once, though he couldn't see me, and resumed walking. No words had been exchanged between us, yet I carried his half-heard line with me like a stone in my sleeve, something to turn over in quiet moments. Behind me, I heard him begin to hum, then start again. "The moon does not wait, but the ink remembers." His brush resumed its dance across the page as I moved on. The sun had climbed to its zenith, casting short shadows across the cobblestones. My empty basket swung lightly at my side, its woven fibers worn smooth from years of the same journey. The market's briny scent reached me before I saw it. Salt and sea carried on the midday breeze. I rounded the corner to find the stalls arranged in their familiar pattern, each vendor calling out their wares with practiced enthusiasm. Tanaka's stall stood where it always had. The weathered wooden boards of his table gleamed with melting ice, and upon this cold bed lay his treasures, row upon row of shimmering fillets, each cut with precision that spoke of decades of practice. Mackerel with their silver-blue skin, pale sea bream arranged by size, and tiny smelt that caught the light like polished metal. The ice beneath them melted slowly, rivulets of cold water streaming between the wooden slats to the ground below. Tanaka himself stood behind his display, a mountain of a man with forearms thick as young tree trunks. His faded indigo apron bore the stains of countless fish, and his sleeves were rolled high above his elbows. Though his hands were slick with scales and salt, his eyes crinkled with mirth as he bantered with the departing customer. I approached quietly, basket in hand, scanning the selection with practiced eyes. I needed no invitation. This ritual was as familiar to us both as the changing of seasons. Tanaka spotted me and wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his waistband. The cloth had once been white, perhaps, but now bore the patina of honest work. "Ah, Kazuo-san," he called, though I stood mere paces away. He reached down and selected a fillet from the display, holding it up so the sun caught its translucent flesh. The cut was perfect. No ragged edges, no bruised meat. "This one," he announced with a broad grin that revealed a missing tooth on the left side. "Still fresher than I am." His laughter erupted from deep in his belly, a raspy, full-bodied sound that seemed meant more for himself than anyone else. The joke was one I'd heard a dozen times before, yet its familiarity brought comfort rather than tedium. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch upward. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that those who knew me recognized as amusement. It was enough. Tanaka nodded, pleased that his well-worn humor had found its mark once again. With practiced movements, he folded a broad bamboo leaf around the fillet, tucking the edges with the precision of an origami master. He bound it with a thin strand of fiber, tying a simple knot that would hold until I reached home. As he worked, the clean scent of the ocean rose from the package, briny, fresh, and honest as the day itself. I placed a small worn coin on the edge of his stall. Tanaka never looked at it, never counted it. The weight of trust between us had been established long ago, heavier than any metal. A small movement caught my eye. A boy of perhaps 6 summers tugged at Tanaka's apron. The child, Tanaka's nephew if I recalled correctly, held a sliver of trimmed fish between his fingers. His eyes darted towards something near the corner of the stall. I followed his gaze to find a mangy cat watching from between 2 barrels. Despite its ragged appearance, the creature moved with undeniable grace, its tail twitching with anticipation. Its yellow eyes remained fixed and unblinking, focused on the boy's offering with ancient patience. The child crouched down, placing the piece of fish on the cobblestone with ceremonial care before backing away several steps. The cat crept forward on silent paws, sniffed the offering once, then devoured it with delicate yet urgent bites. I watched this small drama unfold in silence. The corner of my mouth lifted again, an almost imperceptible movement. Perhaps it reminded me of my own childhood, when such simple kindnesses seemed to make the world turn. Or perhaps I was simply glad to see the creature fed. Tanaka pretended not to notice, whistling softly as he arranged his remaining wares. But his hands paused in their work for just a heartbeat, long enough to reveal his quiet pride in the boy's compassion. The cat, now satisfied, sat back on its haunches and began to lick one paw, drawing it over its ear with regal dignity. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished between 2 crates of vegetables, its striped tail the last thing to disappear behind a row of pickled daikon. I tucked my purchase into my basket and turned to leave. The boy, perhaps emboldened by the success of his charity, raised his hand in a small wave. Not expecting acknowledgement, simply offering one as children do. I nodded once in his direction, the gesture spare but deliberate, the way a warrior might acknowledge a protective spirit at a roadside shrine. I left the market behind, my basket hanging from one arm, and followed the path that curved away from the bustle of commerce. The temple appeared at the edge of town like a whisper made solid. Its pagoda rose in elegant tiers of black tile and faded red, each level smaller than the one below, until the spire pierced the sky like a single brush stroke against blue parchment. Even from a distance, the air seemed different here. Cleaner, as if the wind reserved its purest breath for sacred spaces. I slowed my steps at the gate, feeling the transition from one world to another. The stone torii stood weathered but proud, marking the boundary between common ground and hallowed earth. I removed my sandals and set them neatly beside the stone steps, aligning them with precision, toes pointing outward, ready for my return. The stone felt cool against my bare feet as I walked toward a shaded veranda, each footfall soft as paper settling on still water. In the courtyard, a monk swept in silence. His saffron robes caught the midday light, turning him into a flame that moved slowly across the stones. The broom bristles whispered with each pass, a sound so gentle it might have been mistaken for the breeze itself. His movements formed neither hurry nor hesitation. They simply flowed, like water finding its natural course down a mountainside. I found a seat beside a carved wooden pillar, settling cross-legged on the smooth-worn boards of the veranda. My armor was long gone for the day. Only my kimono remained, the fabric relaxing against my skin. I placed my hands lightly on my knees, palms down, feeling the slight pressure of bone against flesh. Above me, Strings of prayer flags stretched from beam to beam, reds, greens, yellows, all faded by sun and rain until they shared the same quiet dignity. They hung in gentle curves, their edges frayed by time and elements, each thread a testament to endurance. The wind arrived like a thought, not sudden, not strong, just enough to stir my hair and shift my sleeve. The flags responded, rippling in rhythm as if nature itself exhaled with me. I watched without needing to understand, made no attempt to find meaning in their dance. I simply observed the colors, the way sunlight passed through the thin fabric, the stitching worn by countless seasons. The monks sweeping found a rhythm that seemed ancient and inevitable. Forward, return, forward, return. Like waves against shore, like breath in lungs. The sound blended with distant birdsong and the soft creak of temple timbers adjusting to the warmth of day. Without conscious intent, my breathing synchronized with his motion. Inhale as the broom pushed forward across stone. Exhale as it drew back. No mantra, no effort. Just the slow, falling in with something greater than myself, a cadence older than any teaching. The flags tugged lightly at their lines with each breath of wind. One had slipped its knot slightly and now hung looser than its companions. It flapped in its own time, following no pattern but its own. Imperfect, free, beautiful in its deviation. A single petal fell from somewhere above, perhaps from a cherry tree behind the temple, drifting downward in lazy spirals until it landed weightlessly on my knee. Pale pink against the dark fabric of my kimono, it seemed to glow with its own inner light. The monk glanced over, pausing mid-sweep. Our eyes met for a breath. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He simply saw me, as I saw him. A moment of recognition that required no words, no gestures. Then he returned to sweeping, his rhythm unbroken. From somewhere deep inside the temple, a bell rang once. The note hung in the air, clear but not sharp, full but not overwhelming. It marked no hour, gave no instruction. It simply was, filling the space between heartbeats. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. Not to sleep or dream, just to pause, then return. The moment stretched and folded like ink drawn across wet parchment, spreading beyond its intended boundaries into something unexpected and true. The evening light spilled across the temple grounds in amber waves, transforming the bell tower into a pillar of gold and shadow. The structure rose before me, timber beams darkened by centuries of incense and prayer. At its heart hung the great bronze bell, its surface a testament to time, dull where hands had touched it, burnished where they hadn't. The rope that suspended it looked ancient but unfrayed, strong as the faith it served. A boy stood beneath it, his small frame dwarfed by the bell's presence. Perhaps 10 summers old, he wore a simple robe that pooled around his ankles, sleeves hanging well past his wrists. His fingers curled around the wooden striker, a beam nearly as long as he was tall. The wood was smooth from generations of palms that had preceded his. Far behind him, a senior monk observed with the stillness of a mountain. His arms disappeared within his sleeves, his face a landscape of quiet patience. He offered no instruction, no encouragement. This was the boy's moment to carry alone. I watched the child's chest rise and fall unevenly. His knuckles whitened around the beam as he closed his eyes, drawing in a shaky breath that seemed to fill his entire body. The beam wavered slightly as he stepped forward, and the rope creaked overhead, a sound that startled him. The striker's weight pulled against his grip, heavier than he'd expected. The world fell into a strange, expectant hush. Birds that had been calling ceased their songs. The breeze that had stirred the prayer flags all afternoon suddenly died. Even the distant sounds of the city seemed to hold their breath. The temple grounds became a vessel of silence, waiting to be filled. With determination etched across his young face, The boy swung the beam. Both hands guided its arc, not with force, but with intent. The motion was clean, deliberate. Wood met bronze in a kiss that lasted less than a heartbeat. The sound that followed wasn't merely heard, it was felt. A single, resonant tone rolled outward like ripples in still water. It vibrated through stone, through wood, through flesh and bone. The note found its way into my chest, settling there like a truth I'd always known, but never named. The boy's grip loosened gradually. His small hands fell to his sides as his shoulders dropped, tension flowing from him like water. The exhale that followed seemed to release not just air, but the weight of responsibility, of tradition, of the moment itself. As the sound traveled beyond the temple walls, threading through bamboo groves and skimming over tiled rooftops, I remained seated. The tone faded slowly, becoming fainter without ever truly disappearing, like a prayer carried too far to hear, but never too distant to matter. I left the temple grounds with the bell's resonance still humming in my bones. My path led me down a narrow street where moss grew between the cobblestones. At its end stood a weathered clay wall, interrupted only by a small wooden gate barely tall enough for a man. I pushed it open and stepped through. The world transformed immediately, from street noise to sanctuary. A courtyard unfolded before me, shaded by 3 persimmon trees whose branches reached toward one another like old friends in conversation. Their fruit hung unripe and green, promising sweetness months away. The air carried the distinct scent of sap and camellia oil, sharp yet soothing. In the center sat a woman, cross-legged at a low table. Her hair, mostly black but streaked with silver, was tied back with a simple cord. Nothing adorned her ears or neck. Her robe, once indigo but now faded, bore flecks of dried lacquer that caught the light like stars. Her back remained perfectly straight, neither rigid nor strained, but alive with the posture of one who had found balance through repetition. Before her rested a wooden tray, its surface already transformed. It gleamed with a darkness so complete it seemed to pull light into itself. A pool of midnight captured in wood. Yet her hands continued their work, applying another layer with a brush so fine it might have been made from a child's eyelash. Each stroke was deliberate, as if she were smoothing glass with nothing but her breath. Her tools surrounded her in perfect order. Brushes arranged by size, cloths folded into precise squares, polishing stones set in a crescent, small bowls of sap covered with thin paper. No tool touched another. Each occupied its own territory on the mat, waiting to fulfill its purpose. I approached without speaking, my footsteps deliberately soft on the packed earth. I bowed slightly and lowered myself onto the woven mat across from her. No greeting passed between us, only the quiet understanding that comes from shared devotion to craft. Her brush glided along the tray's curve, barely making contact, yet leaving behind a perfect sheen. Shadow and light seemed not merely reflected, but somehow polished into form. "This one has 11 layers," she spoke softly, eyes never leaving her work. "Each must dry, then be sanded, then applied again and again." I watched her hand rather than the tray itself, how it hovered, descended, moved with certainty, paused with intention. The discipline in her movements mirrored what I sought in my own practice with the sword. It teaches me patience, more than prayer. She dipped her brush again, speaking the words lightly but without humor. Not a complaint, a truth earned through endless repetition. I nodded once. I understood. Time, repetition, silence. These were the hidden teachings that outlasted even the blade. With both hands, she lifted the tray and placed it in a bamboo rack against the wall, away from direct light. It would wait there in darkness for days before being touched again. Tiny motes of dust floated in the air between us, caught in shafts of sunlight like stars suspended in night sky. One drifted near her brush, and she removed it with a practiced breath, neither forceful nor tentative. She reached for a fresh piece of wood, pale, raw, full of potential. Her cloth moved across its surface in slow circles, preparing it for its first coat, the beginning of weeks of transformation. I stood and bowed deeper this time, hands at my sides, not for the beautiful object she created, but for the patience that had become her nature. I left the artisan's studio with her words echoing in my mind. The afternoon had begun its slow descent toward evening, casting longer shadows across Kyoto's winding streets. My feet found their way to the philosopher's path almost without thought, as if drawn by an invisible current. The narrow, stone-lined canal stretched before me, its surface a mirror broken only by occasional ripples. Water whispered against stone with a voice older than memory. I walked beside it, each step measured and deliberate. My sandals made soft sounds against the path, not hurried, not reluctant, simply present. Autumn had painted the path in a tapestry of fallen leaves. Gold, rust, and verdant green formed a natural mosaic beneath my feet, each step crushing delicate veins and releasing the earthy scent of decay. The breeze carried a cooler edge now, autumn's warning that winter waited in the wings. Every sound felt magnified in the hush of late afternoon. The soft scrape of my sandals, the gentle sigh of wind through bamboo, water lapping against moss-covered stones. Each noise seemed to carry meaning beyond its making, as if the world spoke in a language just beyond understanding. I came upon a pine tree that stood like a sentinel over the path. Its trunk, thick and gnarled, bore the scars of centuries. Branches stretched outward and upward, bowed by time and thought, reaching toward heaven yet anchored firmly to earth. Moss clung to its base in thick carpets of green, whispering of patience and persistence. I stopped beneath its ancient canopy. This was not a pause to catch breath or rest weary legs. This was a moment of recognition between myself and something far older, far more enduring. The tree had not called me. Rather, we had recognized each other as travelers on different paths of time. Without words or ceremony, I slipped my feet from my sandals. The practiced motion required no thought. I placed them side by side on a flat stone nearby, aligned precisely as if prepared for inspection. My bare feet met the cool earth, toes curling slightly against the uneven ground. The sensation traveled upward, a gentle reminder of connection. A sudden gust sent leaves spiraling around me. They danced through the air like memories given form, some spinning rapidly, others drifting in lazy arcs, each following its own path to the ground. I watched them settle, thinking how similar they were to thoughts that appear, circle, and finally come to rest. The wind brushed against my cheek with cool fingers, not harsh enough to chill, but carrying the weight of seasons turning. It was the kind of breeze that reminds a man of his place in the great cycle. Not insignificant, but temporary. I closed my eyes and let it pass over me, through me. Below, in the narrow canal, a single koi disturbed the surface. Its movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, golden scales flashing briefly in the late afternoon light. It moved through water as I moved through time, neither fighting nor rushing the current. The pines swayed gently above, its shadow shifting across my shoulders like a living thing. Dappled patterns of light and dark played across my back, my arms, my hands. The shadow felt almost like a touch, a reminder of presence beyond my own. I bowed my head slightly, not in prayer to any deity, not in supplication, but in acknowledgement, to the pine that had witnessed generations, to the path that had carried countless feet, to the years behind me and the unknown ones ahead. Far down the path, a child's laugh pierced the stillness, bright and clear as temple bells. The sound echoed briefly before vanishing completely, leaving no trace but a warmth in my chest where memories of my own son lived. I opened my eyes very slowly. The world remained unchanged. Water still flowed, leaves still fell, the pine still reached skyward. Yet something within me had shifted, almost imperceptibly. Not a revelation, but a realignment. A single leaf had come to rest on my shoulder during my stillness. I lifted it between finger and thumb, studying the intricate network of veins, a map of life now fading. After a moment's contemplation, I released it back to the wind's keeping. The moment complete, I stepped back into my sandals. The worn straw fit my feet perfectly, molded by years of walking these streets, these paths. I continued onward, carrying the silence with me. I heard it first, the rapid tapping of feet on stone. Like raindrops growing heavier before a storm, the sound approached with increasing urgency. Tap, 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 tap. Uneven, hurried, the distinctive rhythm of youth in motion. I turned my head slightly toward the sound, a small movement born of curiosity rather than concern. My hand, which had been resting near my obi out of decades of habit, relaxed against my side. The path had been empty moments before, but emptiness never lasts. A small figure burst around the corner. A boy, perhaps 8 or 9 summers, his face flushed with exertion and purpose. His robe hung half-tied, flapping against thin legs as he ran. A bulging satchel bounced against his hip, papers threatening to spill with each step. Between his teeth, clenched carefully but firmly, dangled a scroll bound with simple twine. The end of the parchment flapped wildly with each footfall, like a flag in strong wind. Despite his obvious rush, I noted how gently he held it in his mouth. Whatever message it contained deserved better than his hands, which struggled with the overstuffed bag. I shifted my stance, a subtle movement that opened the path before him. No words were needed, the ground was his to claim in his urgent journey. The boy nearly ran past without seeing me, his eyes fixed on the distance. Then awareness flickered across his face. His steps faltered, sandals skidding slightly on the stone as he came to an abrupt halt. Recognition dawned in his eyes, not of me personally, but of what I represented. He bowed hastily, the motion awkward with the scroll still clenched between his teeth. The parchment bobbed precariously, nearly slipping from its perch. The bow was shallow, rushed, but sincere in its intent. Sumimasen. The apology came muffled around the scroll, the word barely distinguishable. His eyes, wide with embarrassment and the continued urgency of his mission, met mine briefly. He bowed again, deeper this time, almost losing his precious cargo in the process. I lifted my hand in a small gesture, a slight downward motion, barely perceptible. Permission granted. Acknowledgement offered. No offense taken. Relief washed across his face. Without further hesitation, he secured the scroll more firmly between his teeth and bolted away, his sandals slapping against stone with renewed purpose. His small form disappeared around the next bend, leaving only echoes. A fine cloud of dust hung in the air where he had passed, tiny particles catching the afternoon light like suspended stars before settling back to earth. In moments, the path looked undisturbed, as if the interruption had never occurred. I watched the empty space a moment longer, seeing not the path, but something distant. Not the boy himself, but what he had stirred in me. A memory of urgent messages, of duty that couldn't wait, of youth that believed every task held the weight of empires. A smile formed at the corner of my mouth. Small but genuine. A single line creased beside my eye. This was not nostalgia. Nostalgia implies longing. This was recognition of life's unchanging rhythms, played out by different hands across generations. I lowered my gaze, the smile fading gently into calm. The moment passed, complete in itself. The road continued as it always had, as it always would. The path curved toward the river, and I followed. After the courier boy's energy had faded from view, I found myself drawn to the water's edge where the Kamo River slid past in unhurried certainty. Its surface caught afternoon light in rippling patterns, transforming ordinary water into something fluid yet substantial, like silk being pulled across a loom, tension and release in constant negotiation. Just off the footpath, beneath the protective arc of a willow tree, sat a woven mat. The edges had frayed with seasons of use, corners darkened by rain and sun. The mat wasn't placed haphazardly, but positioned with intention, close enough to the river to hear its voice, far enough to stay dry when it swelled. A man sat cross-legged upon it, his form as natural against the landscape as the stones in the riverbed. His robe hung loose around thin shoulders, once indigo but now faded to the color of distant mountains. Beside him lay a conical hat, untouched. His hair, more gray than black, stirred with each passing breeze as if the wind were combing through memories. Nearby sat several bundles of rice straw, bound tightly with twine, their ends trimmed with careful precision. They waited patiently for transformation, raw material for Zori sandals, harvested, dried, and ready to become something useful, something necessary. A low humming rose from the man's throat. Not a song I recognized, but something that felt worn smooth by time. It contained no words, just pure sound, rising and falling like the river itself. Half melody, half murmur, it seemed older than the city behind us, older perhaps than the hills beyond. His fingers moved with a confidence born of 10,000 repetitions. Twist, press, fold. Knuckles, knotted with age, still found their rhythm without hesitation. His thumbs pressed straw into submission while his fingertips guided each strand into place. He worked unhurriedly, but never paused, each motion flowing directly into the next. I stood watching, struck by how his hands mirrored the river beside him. The loop and pull of his fingers followed the same pattern as the eddies swirling around river stones. His movements created their own current, as if his hands had learned their craft not from another artisan, but from the water itself, patient and persistent. 2 finished sandals lay drying on a flat rock nearby, placed to catch the afternoon sun. They weren't beautiful in the way of painted screens or carved jade, but possessed something more essential, the elegance of pure function, shaped by need and use rather than decoration. A dragonfly appeared, hovering briefly before landing on the mat's edge. Its translucent wings flickered in the sunlight, iridescent and delicate. The man didn't look up or acknowledge its presence. The insect rested for the span of 3 breaths, then lifted away, continuing its journey downstream. Children's voices echoed from somewhere beyond the bend, laughter carried on the air like scattered petals. As they neared, though, the sounds diminished, as if the space around the sandal maker demanded its own particular quiet. Their voices faded, respecting the boundary of his concentration. The man paused only once, dipping his fingers into a shallow basin of water beside him. The straw became more pliant with moisture, bending without breaking under his touch. He resumed his work without looking up, though something in his posture acknowledged my presence. I slowed my pace as I passed, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of his work. He didn't raise his eyes, yet his body shifted slightly, the barest tilt of his shoulder in my direction, a nod without nodding. Tiny shavings of straw lay scattered across the mat, catching sunlight in brief golden flashes before being brushed aside with the back of his hand. Nothing wasted, everything kept in order. The humming changed then, shifting keys in mid-breath. The tune softened, one note drawn longer than those before it, like a sigh woven into the melody. No words passed between us, yet something was communicated in that subtle change. As I continued along the path, I glimpsed a 3rd sandal beginning to take shape beneath his hands. The curve of heel, the subtle hollow for an arch, the widening for toes, all emerging from nothing but straw and silence, river rhythm and practiced hands. I left the sandal maker to his craft and turned toward the beaten-down street that would lead me back to the heart of the city. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the worn cobblestones. My thoughts lingered on my apprentice, the boy's determination evident in his clumsy movements, his silence more from concentration than lack of words. Between two winding alleys, I found what I sought, a small shop nestled in the space where most would walk past without noticing. Its wooden sign hung from a single chain, the characters carved with precision though faded by years of sun and rain. Through the single window, I glimpsed bundles of calligraphy brushes hanging like stalactites, surrounded by scrolls rolled tight and ceramic inkstones polished to a quiet gleam. I slid open the door and stepped inside. The air enveloped me immediately, the scent of paper and cedar mingling in a perfume no court lady could replicate. The quiet inside felt deliberate, cultivated like a garden of silence. No music played, no idle chatter floated from back rooms. Just the lingering scent of aged wood, inkstones, and mulberry paper. Smells that carried wisdom older than those who breathed them. A beaded curtain separated the front from the inner sanctum. I ducked slightly as I passed through, the soft clack of wooden beads announcing my presence more effectively than any greeting. The ceiling hung low, forcing even those of modest height to bow their heads upon entry, perhaps an unintended lesson in humility. Brushes hung from racks along the wall, swaying almost imperceptibly with the air disturbed by my entrance. They hung like silent wind chimes. Goat hair, horsehair, and sable, each bundle tied neatly with thread dyed the color of plum skin. Some bristles thick enough to paint bold mountain strokes, others thin enough to capture the finest line of a poem about dewdrops. The shopkeeper emerged from shadows at the back. His eyes met mine, and he offered a simple nod. No words passed between us, just mutual acknowledgement of purpose. I walked slowly to the wall of brushes, hands clasped behind my back, careful not to disturb their perfect arrangement. One brush caught my attention. Slender bamboo handle, neither ornate nor plain. I lifted it carefully, testing its weight in my palm. The balance felt right, neither too heavy for delicate work nor too light to command respect. Its tip tapered to a perfect point, made for precision rather than flourish, for meaning rather than mere decoration. I turned toward the window, holding the brush where light spilled through paper screens. The bristles caught the afternoon sun, revealing their true nature, soft enough to bend without breaking, firm enough to carry meaning from mind to page. Each strand aligned perfectly with its neighbors, creating a unified purpose. The shopkeeper waited, his patience evident in his stillness. He made no attempt to sway my choice or hurry my decision. He understood customers like me came with purpose, not idle curiosity. His silence honored the gravity of selection. "For my apprentice," I finally said, my voice barely rising above the whisper of paper scrolls hanging nearby. "He will need to write before he draws a blade." The corner of the shopkeeper's mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but acknowledgement of understanding. He didn't respond with platitudes or proverbs, just offered a respectful nod that said more clearly than words, "You understand." He took the brush from my hands with reverence, then reached beneath his counter for a sheet of mulberry paper. His movements became ceremonial as he folded the paper around the brush, creasing each edge with thumbnail precision before securing it with twine. The wrapping transformed a simple transaction into ritual. I placed a small coin on the wooden tray between us, neither hurried nor hesitant. The shopkeeper accepted it with a slight bow, never checking its value. The exchange transcended mere commerce. I slid the wrapped brush into my sleeve, tucking it close to my chest where it disappeared from sight. Its physical presence vanished, but its purpose remained, a weight lighter than my blade but somehow more significant today. Outside, a crow called from the tiled rooftop across the narrow street. I paused, listening to its harsh voice cut through the afternoon bustle. The world beyond the shop doorway moved at its own urgent pace. Merchants calling prices, children chasing hoops, women balancing baskets. but the brush against my chest carried stillness within motion. I turned toward home, each step measured and certain. There was no ceremony in my walking, no announcement of my purpose, just the quiet certainty of having chosen correctly, of carrying forward something that would outlast the hand that wielded it. I reached the intersection where the main road bent east, marked by a crooked willow whose branches dipped toward the path like a tired man's shoulders. Instead of following the familiar stoneway, I turned left onto a narrow dirt lane. The brush, tucked safely in my sleeve, tapped gently against my ribs with each step. The path narrowed between wooden homes, their planked walls weathered to the color of dried mushrooms. Sliding doors stood half open, reed blinds swaying in the afternoon breeze. The passage felt intimate, as if I walked through a corridor of other lives, close enough to touch, but separate still. "The salt needs more water," a woman's voice carried from one home. "The string broke again," complained another from somewhere deeper in the maze. Overhead, laundry lines stretched between eaves like bridges of color. Indigo work clothes, saffron-dyed kimonos, and children's sleeves in pale green fluttered in the breeze. The sun filtered through the damp fabric, casting patterns across my arms and face, fleeting tattoos of light that appeared and vanished with each step. The shadows moved across the ground like spirits playing at my feet. A brown dog slept beneath a cart piled with freshly pulled turnips, dirt still clinging to their white flesh. Its tail flicked lazily at flies, ears twitching at sounds too subtle for human detection. As I passed, one eye opened, amber and knowing, then closed again, dismissing me as neither threat nor opportunity. The peaceful quiet shattered as 3 children burst around a corner, chasing each other around a rain barrel. Their laughter echoed between the close walls, amplified by wood and stone. One boy tripped, tumbling into the dust. Instead of crying, he rolled onto his back, laughing harder than before. The others circled him, shouting encouragement to continue their game. I stepped aside without breaking my stride, pausing only slightly as 2 more boys darted past. The smaller one glanced up mid-run, his eyes widening in recognition of my station. He attempted an awkward bow without slowing, nearly toppling forward before his friend pulled him onward. A woman tugged white sheets from a line strung across the narrow lane. Her movements were practiced and precise, a sharp snap of wrists that sent ripples through the fabric before folding each piece into a perfect rectangle. Her eyes never left the children playing nearby, watchful as a heron beside a fish pond. Beneath the spreading branches of a persimmon tree, 2 elderly women sat on woven mats. One held a cloth bundle in her lap, the other offered dried herbs in exchange. Their conversation continued in hushed tones as I approached, neither hurrying nor hiding their business. I nodded respectfully as I passed. They acknowledged me without interrupting their exchange, one lifting a sprig of mugwort in my direction, part greeting, part blessing for the journey ahead. A bamboo ladle rested in a wooden bucket near a doorstep. I paused, scooped water to rinse my hands. The cool liquid slipped between my fingers, carrying away the day's dust. No one witnessed this small ritual, but the act felt necessary, a cleansing before the final stretch home. A sparrow darted through a low window, wings fluttering against rice paper as it disappeared into someone's kitchen. A woman's laughter followed, then the soft swish of a towel as she shooed it back into the open air. The vendor at the corner stall counted copper coins, lips moving silently as his fingers sorted them into neat stacks. His eyes flicked up once to acknowledge my passing, then returned to his count. No words passed between us, just the recognition between men who shared this street and its rhythms. A small girl stood barefoot on a wooden step, arm extended. In her palm sat a single plum, its skin the color of dusk. She offered it shyly, eyes cast downward. I accepted with both hands, bowing slightly to honor her gift. The fruit remained untouched in my palm as I continued walking. The lane opened suddenly, like a river meeting the sea. Before me, Kyoto's eastern hills rose in gentle waves, their slopes touched golden by the sinking sun. Rooftops spread below them like fallen leaves on water, smoke rising from evening hearths. I stopped, breathing deeply. The day's journey settled around me, not behind, but within. The sounds of the narrow lane, the scents of laundry and earth, the faces glimpsed in passing, none left behind, all carried forward in the quiet vessel of memory. At the bend where the path curved sharply, I spotted it, a small shrine nestled into the stone wall. No taller than a man's waist, it stood weathered yet dignified, its wooden frame darkened by seasons uncounted. Moss crowned its peaked roof, nature's silent blessing upon the sacred space. Wind chimes hung from thin twine beneath its shallow eaves, catching the afternoon breeze. Their sound, delicate as glass sighing, floated on the air. Not the deep resonance of temple bells, but something more intimate, as if spirits whispered between worlds. I slowed without conscious thought. My hands fell naturally to my sides, fingers relaxing from the day's tensions. The path around me emptied. No hurried footsteps, no merchant's calls, just the soft tinkling above the shrine. My knees found the packed earth, one and then the other. My robes settled around me in quiet folds, finding their place as they had countless times before. Not the formal posture of court, but the comfortable rhythm of return. Within the shrine's shadowed interior lay small offerings, copper coins, tarnished green, grains of rice, dried oranges with curled rinds. They rested before a simple carved figure, its features softened by time and touch. A fox, perhaps, or a bodhisattva. The distinction mattered less than the reverence it inspired. I reached into my sleeve for the folded paper purchased that morning. The creases were sharp, deliberate, the paper itself unblemished despite its journey. I held it between both hands for a moment, feeling its weight beyond measure. With care, I placed it just inside the wooden frame, not prominently displayed with the coins, but tucked to the side, almost hidden. This message wasn't meant for human eyes. The paper held no request, no bargain with fate. Only a line of gratitude, brushed earlier when the poet had turned away. For another day of breath, for the weight of my sword, for the apprentice's growing hands. I bowed twice, slowly. My forehead touched the earth before the shrine, hands pressed flat against the soil. The first bow carried memories, faces now gone, battles long quieted. The second acknowledged the present moment, this breath, this shrine, this light. A single yellow leaf detached from the tree above, spiraling down in lazy circles. It landed beside my offering, as if drawn there by invisible hands. A seal upon my gratitude, a witness to the exchange. I closed my eyes. Breath flowed evenly, deeply. My shoulders rose and fell once, carrying away something I hadn't known needed release. I stood without disruption, each movement flowing into the next like water finding its course. I didn't brush the dirt from my knees or look back at the offering. The moment was complete. The path beckoned forward again. I slipped my feet into my sandals and continued onward, my pace unchanged. This pause had always belonged to this day, this journey. Behind me, the wind picked up, carrying dust and cherry petals in a gentle swirl. The shrine receded from view, only the voice of the chimes following me, their song altered slightly by the shifting air. I walked on in silence, a weight lifted that I hadn't recognized until its absence. Not abandoned, simply placed where it belonged, in the care of something older than myself. I approached the gate, the cloth-wrapped box held in one hand. The afternoon sun hung low enough to stretch shadows, but still cast dappled light through the maple branches. Golden patches shifted across the packed earth of the yard, dancing with each breath of wind. My apprentice swept in methodical strokes, his back to me. Each movement followed the previous with practiced care, not hurried, not lazy. The broom's bristles made a gentle susurration against the ground, gathering fallen leaves into neat piles. His shoulders were straight, his stance balanced. Even in this mundane task, his training showed. I stepped through the gate without calling out. The wooden frame creaked slightly beneath my sandals, but I made no effort to announce myself. For a moment, I simply watched him work, noting how his grip remained firm yet yielded to the broom's natural movement. The rhythm of his sweeping matched his breathing. Steady, focused, present. He sensed me then. His shoulders tensed slightly before he turned, eyes widening in recognition. Immediately he straightened, rested the broom carefully against a nearby post, and bowed deeply. The gesture contained both proper respect and something more, a quiet pride in being caught performing his duties well. I held the wrapped box before me, lifting it slightly. The cloth covering was simple, unadorned, just as the merchant had provided it. What mattered lay within. His eyes fixed on the package, then lifted to my face. His lips parted, then closed. When he finally spoke, his voice barely carried across the yard. "May I paint the family crest on the box?" The question hung between us. Not presumptuous, not entitled, a request made with full awareness of its weight. To mark something with our mon was no small thing. It claimed the object, but more importantly, claimed the maker. I studied him without answering. Not because I questioned his request, but because some moments deserve the fullness of consideration. The breeze stirred the leaves at our feet. A dragonfly darted through the space between us, wings catching light. I nodded. Once, slowly. The movement contained all that needed saying. Relief softened his features. He bowed again, deeper this time, and stepped forward to receive the box. He took it with both hands, palms open, as if accepting something far more precious than wood and bristle. He carried it to a flat stone near the eastern wall, a place where sunlight still fell unobstructed. With careful movements, he unwrapped the cloth, smoothing it flat against the stone's surface with his palms. From within his robe, he produced a small brush, his own, worn at the edges from practice. He retrieved a shallow dish of ink from a nearby shelf, the black liquid still from this morning's grinding. I moved to the gate and leaned against its frame, arms loosely crossed. Close enough to witness, far enough to grant independence. The boy deserved space to work without scrutiny. He dipped the brush with a steady hand. The first stroke curved across the wooden surface, not perfect, but intentional. His brow furrowed in concentration as he traced the outline of our family emblem, pausing between each movement to consider his next line. A cicada's call rose from beyond the wall, its vibrating cry filling the courtyard. The sound swelled and faded, marking time as the brush lifted and fell. I watched until the pattern began to take form, then turned away. The completion mattered less than the undertaking. I stepped inside, leaving him to finish what he'd begun, alone with the brush, the ink, and the responsibility of carrying a name forward. I stepped into the dojo after my apprentice had finished his work with the ink brush. The boy had grown more precise in his movements, more deliberate in his care. This was good. The brush was merely a beginning. In the corner, the armor rack stood. Simple, hand-carved from cypress. My father had fashioned it before I was born. The wood grain still told stories beneath the weight it bore. The cuirass with its curved front, the shoulder guards resting like sleeping birds, and the lacquered sunlit that had protected my shins through 3 campaigns. I approached it slowly. Dust had settled into the joints where wood met wood, into the crevices where the armor did not touch. Fine particles caught the afternoon light, revealing themselves as tiny constellations against the dark wood. Time marked itself this way, not in grand gestures, but in these quiet accumulations. My apprentice appeared at my side, a cloth dampened with water and vinegar folded neatly in his hands. Without instruction, he knelt before the stand. The movement was fluid, practiced, each knee finding its place on the wooden floor. He unfolded the cloth with deliberate care, as if it too deserved respect. I stood nearby, hands at rest by my sides. This was not my task now. My place was to witness, not to correct or praise. Some lessons lived in the space between action and acknowledgement. He began with the breastplate, drawing small circles with the cloth. His strokes moved outward, always away from the center where our family crest lay lacquered in faded red and black. His fingers traced the edge of each plate with attention that bordered on reverence. The floorboards beneath his knees creaked softly as he shifted his weight. That sound, wood giving slightly under pressure, spoke of age meeting youth, of structures built to bend but never break. The house and I shared this quality. A ray of sunlight cut through the slats of the shoji screen, drawing a perfect line across the room. It moved gradually with the sinking sun, touching the curved surface of the breastplate. For a moment, the tarnished metal turned to gold, capturing fire that had no heat. The boy paused. His hand stilled against the armor as the light passed over it. His eyes followed the beam as if reading a message written in brightness. Then, without comment, he resumed his work. I watched not the cloth or the armor, but the rhythm of his hands. The consistency of pressure, the respect in each stroke, the patience that guided his movements. In this was the true lesson, not the cleaning itself, but the heart behind it. As the dust lifted, the lacquer began to gleam. Each stroke revealed deeper layers of color, bringing forth reflections that had been hidden. Small fragments of the room appeared on the curved surfaces, the ceiling beams, the window frame, even my own silhouette. He moved to the shin guards, lifting each with both hands. He placed them on a folded towel to clean their undersides, cradling the lacquered plates as one might hold a newborn bird. Nothing clanked or scraped. Metal met cloth in perfect silence. After some time, he sat back on his heels. The cloth rested in his lap, slightly darkened from its work. He surveyed what he had done, not seeking approval, but measuring his own care against some internal standard. I nodded once. Not in judgment or instruction, just acknowledgement that I had seen his care, that it had registered in the space between us. Together, we returned each piece to its place on the stand. Everything had its position, its relationship to what came before and after. The armor remembered the body it once protected, and we honored that memory in how we handled it. When we finished, the light had shifted. The beam stretched longer across the floor, reaching toward the eastern wall. The room felt different, not emptier or fuller, but more settled, as if the air itself had exhaled. I left the house through the rear garden gate, following a narrow path that wound between smooth stones and low shrubs. The maple stood alone in a small clearing beyond our property, where the hill began its gentle rise toward the eastern mountains. I had come here since I was a boy. The tree spread its branches like outstretched arms, leaves suspended in that perfect moment between seasons. Some remained steadfastly green, defiant against autumn's approach. Others had already surrendered their edges to gold, while a few had fully embraced the crimson transformation. Neither fully summer nor autumn. This was the time between times. I settled beneath the broad trunk, my legs crossing naturally against the earth. The roots had grown over decades to form a seat that seemed made for contemplation, as if the tree had slowly shaped itself to welcome a human form. My weight pressed against the ground, and the ground pressed back, a silent conversation between flesh and earth. The writing board rested on my lap, worn smooth from years of use. My father had carved it from a single piece of cherry wood, its grain still visible beneath layers of oil from countless fingers. Light filtered through the canopy above, creating patterns that shifted with each breeze. The shadows danced across the blank page, now bright, now dim, as if the paper itself breathed with the wind. One patch of sunlight held steady near the corner, warming the wood beneath my hand. From my sleeve, I withdrew the ink brush I had purchased for my apprentice. The silk wrapping came away slowly, revealing the dark bamboo handle and the pristine bristles that had never touched ink. Just this once, I would test its quality. A good teacher must know the tools he gives. My notebook opened with a familiar rustle. Unlike the formal scrolls used for official correspondence, these pages held my private thoughts. Half-formed verses, observations of birds, memories that required preservation. Many characters already marked these sheets, some dating back seasons. This was not a place for perfection, but for truth. The ceramic ink dish balanced on a flat stone beside me. Black ink pooled in its center, catching fragments of sky in its glossy surface. I dipped the brush tip carefully, watching as the bristles drank the darkness. A single drop fell back into the dish, excess returning to its source. The first stroke appeared without hesitation, a vertical line that anchored the character to the page. Then another, horizontal, crossing the first with deliberate pressure. The brush moved as an extension of my arm, my breath, my thought. The characters formed one after another, speaking of wind and maple leaves and the transience of autumn light. With each stroke, the brush splayed slightly against the paper's texture. The ink spread in tiny, unpredictable ways, thicker where I paused, thinner where I moved quickly. These imperfections gave the writing life. No two characters identical, just as no two moments ever truly repeat. A single leaf detached from a branch above, spiraling down through the dappled light. It landed near the bottom of the page, just beyond the last character I had written. Its edges curled slightly, its stem pointing toward the unfinished line. I looked at it without moving to brush it away. The leaf had its own purpose. My hand paused above the page. 3 characters remained unwritten in the verse that had formed in my mind. The brush hovered, ink beginning to dry on its tip. I did not continue, not because the words escaped me, but because some things must remain unspoken to be understood. I laid the brush across the page, its ink-stained tip pointing toward the fallen leaf. The bristles curved slightly against the paper's surface, as if bowing to what nature had provided. Looking up through the branches, I followed the maple's architecture to the sky beyond. The blue had deepened, edges turning rose gold where the sun approached the western mountains. Between the leaves, patches of indigo promised evening's approach. The air cooled against my skin, a gentle shift that spoke of day's end. A breeze caught the hem of my robe, lifting it slightly before letting it settle. Time passing, marked not by bells or voices, but by these subtle changes in light and temperature. I closed the notebook without blotting the ink, without disturbing the leaf. The characters would dry in their own time, preserving both what I had written and what I had chosen to leave unsaid. The unfinished verse would remain so, complete in its incompleteness. I remained seated beneath the maple, my hands at rest. Not seeking enlightenment, not planning tomorrow's duties. Simply existing in the space between one breath and the next, between one season and another, between what is spoken and what is known without words. The unfinished verse lay beside me, characters still drying in the afternoon light. The ink brush rested where I had placed it, bristles darkened and stiff. Maple leaves gathered at my feet, collecting in small drifts against my ankles. They settled without sound, like thoughts arriving at the edge of sleep. I did not move. The garden held me in place, not with restraint, but with the gentle weight of belonging. My breath found its natural rhythm, in, out, matching the subtle sway of branches overhead. Behind me, footsteps approached, not hurried, not tentative, just the steady rhythm of sandals against earth, accompanied by the whisper of cloth brushing against itself. I did not turn. Some arrivals require no acknowledgement. A figure stepped into view, the monk from the morning market, his shaved head catching the late sunlight. René. In his hands, a simple wooden tray balanced with the steadiness that comes from years of carrying nothing more valuable than water. I looked up. Our eyes met briefly, not in greeting or question, but in mutual recognition, not of faces or names, but of something deeper, the quiet that exists between heartbeats, the pause between one thought and the next. Without a word, he knelt across from me. His robes settled around him like water finding its level, folding naturally against the ground. With practiced care, he placed the tray in the space between us, a bridge rather than a barrier. On the tray, 2 ceramic cups, unglazed and worn smooth by countless hands, and a clay teapot, modest in its simplicity. From the pot's spout rose a thin wisp of steam, barely visible against the darkening sky. Not boiling, just warm enough to release the essence of what it held. The scent reached me. Roasted rice, earth after rain, perhaps a trace of pine smoke, not fragrant in the way of blossoms, but present in the way of stone and soil. René's hands moved with unhurried precision. He poured the tea in a single, continuous motion, enough to warm the cup but not fill it completely. No flourish, no ceremony, yet nothing careless in his movements. The liquid caught the light as it fell, amber becoming gold. I accepted the cup with both hands, my fingers curving naturally around its warmth. I bowed my head slightly, not in thanks, but in acknowledgement. One does not thank the rain for falling or the sun for rising. We raised our cups in unison, without toast or signal. The tea touched my lips, passed over my tongue, plain, slightly bitter, carrying the taste of earth and afternoon. Not a flavor to be savored, but a moment to be held. Above us, the wind moved through the maple. Branches creaked softly, a language older than words. Leaves detached and spiraled downward, some landing on our shoulders, others disappearing into the grass. One touched the surface of my tea, then sank. We did not speak, not because words failed, but because they were unnecessary. Everything that needed saying had already been said, in the curve of a hand offering tea, in the slight inclination of a head accepting it, in the shared rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The silence expanded around us, neither empty nor full. It became its own presence, as tangible as the cooling tea, as real as the wooden tray between us. It draped over our shoulders like a second robe, familiar and weightless. I set my cup down first. The sound of clay against wood marked the moment. Not an ending, but a transition. My breath came deeper now, slower, as if some knot within my chest had finally loosened after years of tightening. My sword lay across my palms, sheathed and wrapped in indigo cloth. Not displayed as a weapon, not hidden as a secret, simply offered as what it was, an extension of myself I had carried for more than 30 seasons. The fabric had absorbed the oils of my hands over many years, darkening where my fingers most often rested. Ahead, René waited on a wooden platform barely raised above the earth. His bare feet rested against weathered planks, toes slightly curled as if grasping the wood's grain. Though his eyes remained lowered, I felt his attention, not wary, not judging, but fully present. His stillness wasn't empty. It was readiness distilled to its purest form. I approached without hurry, each footfall placed with the same care I'd once used to cross enemy territory. When I reached the platform, I knelt, my knees finding their familiar places against the hard ground. My hands extended, placing the wrapped sword on the low wooden surface between us. My fingers lingered there briefly, as if reluctant to complete the separation, then withdrew to rest on my thighs. René bowed deeply, not to me, but to what lay between us. His forehead nearly touched the platform's edge. The bow carried weight beyond mere courtesy. It acknowledged the years this steel had witnessed, the lives it had taken, the duty it represented, the restraint it had sometimes required. I had not expected such recognition from a man who had chosen a path so different from my own. Neither of us spoke. Words would have been intrusive, like shouts in a shrine. Our silence held everything necessary. Respect, understanding, the passage of time, the inevitability of change. Nearby bamboo rustled, its hollow stems knocking gently against one another like wooden prayer beads. Without hesitation, René reached forward. His hands, smaller than mine, uncalloused by sword hilts, touched the cloth-wrapped blade with reverence. He lifted it as if it weighed nothing, though I knew its true heft. With fluid grace, he set it aside just beyond the platform's edge, placing it carefully on a square of folded white cloth I hadn't noticed before. The sword rested there, present but peripheral, acknowledged but not centered. From within his sleeve, René produced something unexpected. A single plum blossom, pale pink against his skin. Fresh fallen, still perfect in its form. He placed it precisely where the sword had been, centering it on the empty space with the same care he might arrange an offering to Buddha. As he withdrew his hand, a single petal detached and fell to the wood. The blossom was already beginning its dissolution, surrendering to impermanence even in this moment of perfect placement. I remained motionless, breathing steadily. My gaze moved from the delicate flower to the monk's face, then softened, focusing on neither. The space between heartbeats lengthened. I did not reach for the blossom, nor look back at my sword. Wind passed between us, carrying the scent of moss and distant incense. The platform held no weapon now, only a flower. René stood, his posture balanced and open. I remained kneeling, the difference in our positions creating its own silent language. With a small bow, briefer than before but no less sincere, René stepped backward. He did not wait for acknowledgement or thanks. He turned unhurriedly, allowing me time to absorb what had transpired before the moment dissolved completely. I lowered my head toward the blossom, not in deference, but in attention. I breathed in its subtle fragrance, something sweet yet fleeting, a perfume that existed more in memory than in sense. I did not touch it. Some things are understood more clearly at a distance. Long after René disappeared down the stone path, I remained kneeling. My sword lay nearby, still within reach. But what commanded the center now was emptiness marked only by a falling flower. I sat with this understanding as the sun continued its arc across the sky, as shadows shifted their allegiance from west to east, as steel was replaced by softness, if only for this moment, if only in this place. I returned to my quarters as the sun bled through the shoji screens. Amber stripes fell across the wooden floor, each one a measure of the day's passage. The room had gathered stillness like a bowl collects water, slowly, completely, until nothing more could be added. My sword waited on its low stand, unsheathed but polished. The curved steel caught gold from the setting sun, transforming the weapon into something else entirely. Not an instrument of death or duty, but simply presence. The way a mountain is present, asking nothing, offering nothing, simply being. I knelt beside it, my joints remembering their age as I folded my legs beneath me. The movement was practiced, deliberate. My breath deepened naturally, finding its proper rhythm without instruction. Some lessons, once learned, become indistinguishable from the body itself. The haiku from this morning waited in my sleeve. I reached for it with weathered fingers, feeling how the once crisp paper had softened at the edges. It had traveled with me through market stalls and temple grounds, absorbing the day's moisture and movement. The creases had multiplied, like thoughts that branch and complicate with consideration. I unfolded it with both hands, each motion unhurried. The paper opened like a flower, reluctant to reveal its center. The ink had faded slightly where sweat from my body had touched it, but the characters remained clear. 3 lines about a crow calling from a winter branch. Simple words that somehow contained more now than when I first read them. I placed the poem beside my sword, not touching the steel, but belonging in its company. The soft paper rested to the right of the blade, each the shadow of the other. One hard, one yielding, one cutting, one holding. My palm moved across the page once, smoothing it from top to bottom. The gesture came without thought, like comforting a child or blessing a journey. The paper responded to my touch, settling against the wood. My eyes lingered on the characters, not to judge their form or meaning, but to witness them again, now changed by the day they had followed. The words were the same. I was not. I closed my eyes and drew breath deep into my belly. Cedar from the room posts, iron from the blade, ink from the poem, all mingled in that single inhalation. I didn't seek calm. I was anchoring myself to this moment, this exact arrangement of elements. The light shifted across the floor as clouds passed overhead. My sword's shadow stretched longer, reaching toward evening. The poem's corners lifted slightly in a breeze that found its way through a gap in the screens. A cicada began its evening call outside, slower than midday's urgent chorus, a tired pulse that marked time's continued flow. The sound entered the room like an uninvited but welcome guest. I made no move to gather either object again. The sword and poem had found their places. Nothing more needed addition. Nothing required removal. I bowed once, deeply, my forehead nearly touching the floor. The bow acknowledged the blade, the words, and the hours that had connected morning to evening. This wasn't ritual performed for tradition's sake. It was remembrance, recognition of what had passed and what remained. I stayed there as darkness gathered in the corners of the room. No lamp was lit. No words disturbed the silence. The day, like the poem I'd left unfinished in the garden, remained open-ended, and in that incompleteness, somehow perfect. In the corner of my chamber stood a box I hadn't touched in seasons. Constructed of aged cedar, its surface bore the subtle marks of years, not scars, but character. The dark iron trim caught the lantern light in dull gleams. It wasn't ornate or decorated with flourishes. My father had commissioned it for purpose, not display. A box meant for care, for keeping. I moved toward it without hurry. My robes pooled around my knees as I knelt before it, the floor familiar beneath me. The weight of my sword across my thighs felt both intimate and somehow foreign tonight, like greeting an old friend whose face had subtly changed. The sheath remained in place, undrawn. I held the weapon with reverence but not attachment, feeling its weight pull against my palms. 27 summers I had carried it. The heft seemed heavier tonight, though the blade itself remained unchanged. With 2 fingers, I lifted the lid. It rose without resistance or sound, as though the wood remembered this motion from long ago. No creak of protest, no reluctance, just a quiet welcome, like a memory being reopened after patient waiting. Inside lay a folded cloth of pale gray silk. My wife had placed it there before her passing, smoothing it with her small hands while I watched from the doorway. The fabric remained pristine, untouched by dust or time, faintly scented with cedar. It had waited, flat and expectant, for this return. I lowered the sword into the box. The movement came from somewhere deeper than thought, precise, measured, deliberate. The blade didn't touch the sides as it descended. It nestled into the cloth, not as something being hidden away, but as something finding home. My fingers adjusted its position, tilting it just so. The hilt angled slightly upward, allowing the family crest to face the ceiling, as though the blade might still observe the room, still participate in the life it would no longer touch. I didn't immediately withdraw my hands. They rested on the wood, not from hesitation, but acknowledgement. There was no fear in this gesture, no doubt, only the finality that comes with knowing, the certainty of a circle completed. My fingers glided along the edge of the box, tracing the grain that ran like rivers across its surface. The touch was absent-minded, the way one might brush the hair of an old friend. Not farewell, just presence. I placed the lid back atop the box. There was no clasp to secure it, no lock requiring a key, just a wooden cover settling quietly into place. The act was complete but not sealed, like a book closed but not forgotten. The room held no sound but my breathing. No chants, no ceremonial words. Just stillness and the memory of all the times the blade had been lifted, and the understanding of why it no longer needed to be. The decision felt both monumental and ordinary, like rain falling after drought. Light from my paper lantern fell gently across the box, casting long shadows behind me. The wood seemed to absorb the glow rather than reflect it, drinking in the warmth as though thirsty for it. I bowed deeply before it, not to the weapon itself, but to the years it had carried, the choices it represented, the part of myself that had lived inside its steel and purpose. When I rose, I didn't look back, not from coldness or dismissal, but from resolution. The choice had been made, the gesture completed. Nothing more required witness. I slid open the shoji screen and stepped into the corridor. The night air touched my face with unexpected coolness. My hand, accustomed to the weight at my hip, felt strange in its emptiness, but my steps fell lighter, my shoulders straighter. No one witnessed this moment. No declarations marked its passing. Only a quiet exhale as I walked into the next moment. Lighter, older, and free from steel. I slip from the room like a shadow parting from its form. My feet make no sound on the tatami as I withdraw, leaving behind only the impression of where I knelt. The space feels different now, lighter, unburdened. The sword box sits in perfect stillness, neither waiting nor abandoned, simply being. The tatami room holds the day's warmth like a cupped hand. Moonlight filters through the rice paper screens, painting silver patterns across the floor mats. My lantern flickers gently from the corner where I left it, casting long, peaceful shadows that stretch toward the center of the room. I'm no longer there, yet something of me remains. Perhaps in the faint indentation on the cushion or in the lingering scent of tea and pine. The perspective shifts, lowers, settles. The room looks different from here, from this vantage closer to the ground. The ceiling beams stretch overhead like protective arms. The corners of the room soften, less defined now. A breath moves through the space, deep, unhurried. Not mine, perhaps yours, perhaps the house itself, exhaling after centuries of vigilance. The sound fills the room without disturbing it. The shoji screen trembles slightly, its wooden frame offering a quiet creak as night air slips through the narrow gap. Outside, crickets weave their song into the darkness. A temple bell sounds once, distantly, then fades. Maple leaves whisper secrets to one another in the garden. The edges of everything blur softly, not in confusion but in gentle acceptance, like memories that don't need sharp definition to hold their truth. The sword box, the cushion, the lantern, all remain, but their boundaries melt into the shadows. "You're here," comes a voice, warm and close, though barely above a whisper. Not my voice, not anyone's voice you could name. It sounds like the space between heartbeats. The tatami beneath feels cool and yielding, textured like living earth. The night air touches skin with the gentleness of a breath. Everything is still, yet nothing is truly motionless. The world breathes around you. You're part of it now, the voice continues as though the city itself, the market stalls, the monk's prayers, the apprentice's determined hands, has folded itself inside you like origami, compact but complete. Wind touches the paper lantern, making its light dance momentarily across the walls. The flame inside doesn't fight the movement, but sways with it, accepting change as natural. Silence spreads through the room. Not empty silence, but one filled with everything that has happened and everything that might. The silence of a poem's final line, hanging in the air before it settles into meaning. Rest, the voice says, so softly it might be imagination. The word falls like a maple leaf, spinning gently to the ground. The sounds of night begin to fade. First the crickets, then the rustling leaves. The bell doesn't ring again. Only the sound of breathing remains, steady and deep. The shoji screen moves once more, a gentle pulse like a sleeping child's chest. Then stillness, complete stillness. You are where I was. The day has become memory, and memory has become peace.